Hello, and welcome to Let's Discuss Hyperlight Drifter. This is a sort of in-depth discussion of my game of the year for 2016. I know I've done quite a few videos on my channel already about this game, but I wanted to talk about it in some more depth, and I've invited a friend of mine from the internet, Elias. Is it Elias? Is that right?
Yeah, it's pronounced Elias. Yeah,
Okay, Elias. Thank you. So
that's
yeah.
it. Yeah.
All right. So I've
Oh, thanks
invited.
for thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's a really great game, so I'm excited to chat about it.
Yeah. It's fantastic. So we kind of know each other through the Duckfeed TV community. So there's some sort of Dark Souls connection for us, I guess you could say. We're both fans of Dark Souls 3. So if you want to disregard all our opinions about video games right now, that's okay. But, maybe stay a while and listen. So we're here to talk about Hyperlight Drifter, not Dark Souls. And this is, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's a game that was actually kickstarted in 2013. And it was a part of a successful Kickstarter campaign and kind of like the sort of the initial wave of Kickstarter successes, I think.
Mm.
It had a $27,000 goal, and it raised $645,000. So it blew way past its goal, which is fairly common for a successful Kickstarter. But the fact that it had a little under $30,000 as its budget really marks it as, I think, like an early Kickstarter, because I think as Kickstarter continued to evolve over the years after its launch, people started to become more and more aware of sort of the actual costs of development, and these like ultra low budgets. I think have mostly disappeared at this point. You're usually looking, you know, $500,000 as a minimum or something like that, right?
Yeah, totally. Did you see this when it was still being kickstarted?
Yeah,
Do you
I
know what
actually
event?
backed the game.
Yeah, right.
So for me, it was I kind of just it's kind of superficial, but I just saw the visuals of the game and the idea that this would be a like pretty cool 2D action game, and I was pretty much sold because at this point in time, there was so much hype around Kickstarter. I was backing quite a few things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thankfully, this was one of the projects that actually panned out. I think it worked out quite well. But it's interesting to go and take a look at sort of what they actually said about the game when it was still a Kickstarter project. And it says that the game is a 2D action RPG in the vein of the best 8-bit and 16-bit classics, with modernized mechanics and designs on a much grander scale. Vision for this game have been fluttering in my skull. So this is Alex Preston, the creator of the game, for ages. Something dark and fantastic with giant forests to navigate, huge floating structures to explore, deep crumbling ruins to loot, massive throngs of enemies to rend, and behemoths, both flesh and mechanical, to overcome. I want it all to be as beautiful as possible, forging color with the dark and eerie wastes and intimidating landscapes. It plays like the best parts of A Link to the Past and Diablo evolved. Uh, Lightning fast combat, more mobility, a array of tactical options, more numerous and intelligent enemies, and a larger world with a twisted past to do it all in. So I think that this game. I think that the sort of vision of the game as this dark and fantastic world with forests and floating structures and crumbling ruins and big enemies and all that kind of thing. I think that part of the vision was realized.
Mm.
And it does play very fast, right? It does have fast combat.
Yeah.
It does have fast mobility, but like I would never call this game an RPG. Um,
No. No.
it's
I mean, you've
yeah,
got there are upgrade paths, but they're not character upgrade paths, right?
right. I mean, it kind of feels like, you know, the sophistication of the character upgrades are really no more sophisticated than something you would find in a character action game like Devil
Yeah.
May Cry
Yeah.
or Bayonetta. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I really would not classify this game as an RPG. And I also don't think it plays really anything like Zelda, like A Link to the Past, other than the fact that it is an overhead world with like a sort of number of dungeons you can visit. But like
I
yeah,
think to a degree, there's that exploration though, like the exploration that you kind of have to do within a screen on Hyperlight Drifter does remind me a lot of poking around in the corners of Link to the Past. I think that it does evoke a little bit of that,
yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's
finding
fair.
secrets and stuff.
Yeah, it's just that it doesn't. It's the combat and the even the exploration feel quite different from Link to the Past to me, in the sense that, like, okay, the combat is much faster, obviously, and it feels totally different from a Zelda game. Uh,
Yeah.
but the exploration, each area of the game is like a there's like a dungeon that is broken down into sub dungeons, right?
Mhm.
And that feels different than a Zelda game where you typically have a larger sort of cohesive dungeon that is filled with puzzles. And this game
Yes.
has
Yeah.
no puzzles in it at all, as
No.
far as I can tell. Like there's really no puzzles, and there's no like gimmick items used in each dungeon to um, give it a theme and a sort of mechanic to build around. Yeah. So that part is totally different. And then when it comes to Diablo, like, wow, it's kind of like, where were they coming from on that one? There's hordes of enemies.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's kind of like Diablo, right? And yeah, I mean, Diablo is like a loot collectathon, right?
Yeah.
It's like a loot treadmill, and Hyperlight Drifter is definitely not that. There's so many ways in which this game is not like Diablo. It's like,
I mean, it feels like the only similarity is the perspective and maybe like the some of the sizes of the characters kind of are reminiscent of Diablo.
yeah,
But
I
that's
could
about it.
kind of see how like the sort of orc enemies you fight, like the ones who leap at you,
Yeah.
um, they kind of remind me of Fallen a little bit from Diablo. Like the little guys that sort of run around and attack you. But man, yeah. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the way the dungeons actually play when we get into the different areas. But I just wanted to sort of bring that up, that like, yeah, this game evolved a lot over its development. I think, because of uh, just, well, that's just how a development process works. And it's interesting because when you have a game on Kickstarter, like, you can kind of see what the design document was and then where it went afterwards, right?
Mm.
Whereas in a sort of standard commercial release, that's not something you're privy to. Um,
So as a Kickstarter backer, did you get how many updates did you get? Did you get like any design doc things as they evolved or anything like that?
Actually, this, from what I remember, this Kickstarter was fairly non-communicative. Like
Mm.
there was 87 updates on the project from what I can see, but I know, like, um, for me at that time, I think Pillars of Eternity was backed around this time.
Mm.
And that was sort of like the gold standard for communication. Or maybe the Shadowrun games from Schemes. They did some pretty good communication with the backers as well in terms of like, this is what we're doing. Like here's somebody from the team explaining what they're doing, all that kind of thing. Whereas this game was kind of, yeah, it was a mystery to me really until launch. Um,
Yeah, right.
and I think that was true for a lot of people who backed the game because when the game came out, I mean, it did fairly well with critics. It got like, what was it, an 87 on Metacritic? No,
Mm.
84 on Metacritic. Yeah, like Destructoid gave it a 9 out of 10. Eurogamer 4 out of 5.
And
Uh,
that's where I started hearing about it. I didn't hear about it until all these positive reviews started coming out, and I looked at it and went, "Oh, looks like my kind of game." So I actually had no idea that it had been a Kickstarter game.
so that's interesting to me. It's like, what was it about the game that sounded appealing to you?
It was a few things. It was, I mean, the art style's quite beautiful. It's really striking. It's the sort of thing where even my wife, who has absolutely no interest in video games, will walk past the television and go, "Huh, that's kind of nice."
Yeah,
So
it's beautiful, really beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, and I'm also having a bit of a year. I mean, not to bring everything back to Dark Souls, but I was feeling like I wasn't enjoying much after playing a lot of Dark Souls this year,
Hmm.
and I wanted something with a little bit of it had this game also had a bit of a reputation for being quite difficult,
Yes.
um, and that is something I was craving after feeling really empty after a few Dark Souls. Games after Dark Souls just felt too easy,
So
too shallow. I wanted
when
something a little bit challenging.
when you say Dark Souls, are you talking about Dark Souls 3?
I'm talking about this was my year of Dark Souls where I played everything.
Okay, okay, sure, right. Okay, so you came to
so
this
so
after doing like, what was it? You did Dark Souls 3, then 1, then 2 or something like
then
that?
Bloodborne, then two, and like yeah, just everything. So I
Okay.
came and I might have actually played this before Dark Souls 3 to be honest. I think I'd played Bloodborne and then Dark Souls twice,
Right,
and
okay.
every game I played after that just felt a bit hollow. Just
Right.
the combat felt crap. Just did nothing was connecting, and so Hyperlight Drifter filled that gap for me for about 6.5 hours, which was very nice.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you started with Bloodborne. And I think this game could be considered similar to Bloodborne's combat in a number
Mm,
of ways.
yep.
Most obviously, the fact that like your healing animation seems to be pretty closely linked to the blood vial animation from Bloodborne.
Yeah, I
Um,
hadn't made that connection, but you're totally right.
yeah, it definitely looks like that stab in the left leg kind of thing that the hunter does in Bloodborne. Um,
Mm,
But okay, so this is interesting to me as somebody who came to this game outside of the Kickstarter and like with the hype from the press as the thing that
yep.
brought you to the game, because if you actually look at the Kickstarter page, it doesn't say anything about Dark Souls. It
No.
says Link to the Past and it says Diablo, right? And there were a lot of people who backed the game when this game was launched who actually were quite angry. And there
Mm,
was a lot of backlash to the developers because this game was much, much more difficult than advertised.
yeah.
Like it says they wanted to make it challenging, but that's such like an ambiguous statement. Like I think like it's kind of like the term challenging is used as just sort of vapid marketing speak in most cases in the games industry. So like it's like, oh, it's challenging. Like, does that mean it's actually hard, or does it just mean it kind of like gives you a sense of having been challenged? Right? Like, is
Mm,
it the appearance of challenge or is it the real thing? And in the case of Hyperlight Drifter, it's the real thing, right? Like it does in some ways resemble Dark Souls, in terms of
Us just
like, yeah, just its difficulty and a little bit the way the combat flows, although it's not a perfect analogy.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and interestingly, it has similarities in some of the ways it tells its story, like,
yeah,
slightly oblique, lots of environmental storytelling. If anything, Hyperlight Drifter is even more obscured than Dark Souls, but there's certainly a similarity there. And I wonder if it's less about Dark Souls inspiring Hyperlight Drifter and more about both of those games being inspired by 8-bit and 16-bit stuff, which is a lot more difficult and has a lot less text, and the storytelling's all kind of within the game.
yeah. I think that's actually quite astute observation because my gut feeling is that this game became more like Dark Souls during
Mm.
development. It probably, like, I would imagine the developers played Bloodborne and were like, "Oh, this is cool." Um, because if you look at the mock-ups for the game, you actually see like damage numbers appearing above the enemies when they're getting hit,
Oh,
and
that's way more RPG. Yeah, I
yeah,
hadn't noticed that.
it's way more RPG, and there's like menu systems and stuff that are like kind of like the Secret of Mana menus, and like yeah, it's just I think they probably were going for that sort of hybrid of Link and Diablo when they first developed this game. But they were probably like, oh, actually, maybe we can do something different, and it ended up working better to kind of take some ideas from Dark Souls or Bloodborne. And I think like it's not a perfect analogy. Like this game is different from Dark Souls in many ways, which we'll
Yeah,
maybe get into.
totally.
But I think there is some DNA there.
Mm.
Okay, so yeah. Anyway, the point I wanted to make there was that there was a lot of hostility when this game was launched. Like major hostility against the developers on the forums.
Yeah, wow.
Because people were very angry that's like, I just boot up this game and then I get swarmed by a mob and they just murder me and I try to heal and like I don't even have iframes when I'm dodging and I try to heal and they kill me in the middle of my heal animation, right? Like just people really really angry because they're like, I signed up for Zelda and this is what you give me, right?
Yeah.
Um but I think for people who actually like came to the game post release having read reviews, they probably weren't that upset because they're like, oh yeah, I came here for a sort of Soulsborne like experience, and it's kind of that. Although there are differences that maybe would piss them off too, but I think generally
So,
speaking, it was the backers who were the most upset.
and as a backer yourself, how did you react when you played it? Like, what were your first impressions?
Well, I actually, my first impressions are on this channel because I streamed my
Oh, all
my
right.
my first experience of the game, and I
Oh,
really
great.
had no idea at all what to expect coming into the game. Like I hadn't read reviews of the game. Like I downloaded it as soon as it went live on Steam. Um, and I was like, okay, let's give this a try. Let's see what it's like because I was so excited about this game, but I didn't really know anything about it. Um, and yeah, like I was just I was in love with it like from the very beginning. It was
Cool.
so great. The thing like I okay, so maybe this is a good point to actually start talking about the beginning of the game. Um, so you get that awesome intro sequence at the beginning of the game, which is like a kind of animated scene. I think it's actually a GIF file or something like that. Like if you go into the game files on PC, like they're all just kind of there. Like
That's crazy.
they're not in archives or anything, and I think it's just like, oh, it's just a series of GIFs. Um, but don't quote me on that. It's just something I checked a while back. Um, so yeah, so I'm just gonna bring it up because well, I've got it right here. Um, So the whole thing starts out, and you have these kind of like floating particles that are coming out of the bottom of the screen, and then it pans down to the city that this whole game is set around, um, and all of this series of scenes kind of reminded me of like Flashback or Out of This World. The
Mm,
animation style, it sort of felt like it was that kind of rotoscoped animation technique
yeah, yeah,
that
good point.
you see in those old games. A very distinctive style. And this opening scene is, from what I can tell, it's sort of like a mixture of the protagonist story, the Drifter, and like the world story. They're kind of like mixed up together. Where like it's almost like the Drifter is maybe like hallucinating or getting visions from Anubis, the dog god that we see in the game, where he's like seeing what has happened to the world, but at the same time is like experiencing stuff that has to do with his own condition, as like having a terminal illness, right?
Mm.
So like yeah, we see like these oceans of corpses and blood and explosions and all these apocalyptic scenes, but there's also like the Drifter coughing up blood and then being chased by the boss of the game, right?
Mm.
And then you see Anubis show up here and there too. So it's almost like, my read on this is that it's like Anubis is sort of telling the Drifter what the history of the world is, what the situation is, through a vision. But then like the Drifter's own memories are sort of like mixed up in that. Um, so, I mean, what were your thoughts when you first saw this intro sequence?
So yeah, I mean, I've played through the game only twice, and both times that intro sequence just, I mean, it's very affecting. I
Mm-hmm.
think what was kind of most important about it is the kind of emotions that it comes to evoke.
Yeah.
From like a literal story perspective, I really just wasn't connecting to it. You kind of work out that the dog is going to be your guide, and that you're in a world full of hell with dead bodies everywhere. Something terrible's happened. It's kind of apocalyptic,
Yeah.
and that you've got a disease. Like, it does establish a lot of the kind of foundations of the game story, but it leaves so much up to interpretation. It's really it's yeah, it's quite bold in its choice to hide the story a bit.
Yeah, in a sense, it reminds me of like a kind of avant-garde animation project, right? Like that.
Yeah.
It's not like expository in any way. It's just a series of images, kind of dreamlike and surreal, almost like a nightmare. Also, but I think
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
yeah, I think like you get those sort of like, oh, you get these images like this character's important, this character's important,
Mm.
but in a way it's almost like the first time you see it, I think it's kind of overwhelming. Like it's so just like, I don't know, like arresting, all these different images that like you don't really think too much about what's happening. It's just like, wow, like these
Yeah.
images are incredible, like
And they do get repeated throughout the game, which is good. Like, each time
yeah.
you kind of unlock one of those pillars from that which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get that repeated vision, and some of those images come back. They don't do much to kind of help explain it any further, but you get to at least kind of see them within the context of the game and the experiences that you've had,
Yeah,
rather
totally.
rather than just in that cold opening.
Right. Yeah, 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 yeah. And yeah, that repetition of images in order to sort of like clue you in on what's happening.
Mm.
Um I think we can talk about that some more, but that is like definitely a storytelling technique that they are using in this game, in which they're trying to avoid using written text as much as possible, right? Um,
Yeah, like the written text is only like telling you how to play the game. It's all instructional.
Yeah, and if I
There's basically no
remember correctly, on the original build of the game, even that wasn't in the game.
Oh, right.
Yeah, like I might be wrong on that, but as far as I remember, like when you go through that tutorial area at the beginning, like it didn't have those prompts. Um, so that was kind of a concession to playability that the creators made, which maybe wasn't part of their original vision. And I should mention, actually, just talking about the Kickstarter and the original build of the game, that there was a demo for this game that was released before it came out. I think it was like in the maybe the late 2015 that it came out. And it's basically a part of the south area of the game. So it was quite difficult. But so yeah, so like I kind of I should say yeah, I first played the game. I kind of knew what the game was like because I had played through the demo like 3 times already. But
Cool.
I didn't know what the whole structure of the game would be or anything. It's just like you go through this facility and you see a big giant and it's like, whoa, this is a crazy image, and then it's over. So yeah, so that was a thing. All right, so yeah, so after the video finishes, you sort of end up in this, like, I mean, it's almost like this kind of like hellscape that you're in. You're on this beach with a campfire, and in the distance there's just like lightning, and all the water is pink, and all this kind of thing, and it's like that image in particular really really reminds me of Out of This World. It's like it's a kind of scenery we don't really see in the rest of the game. We see it in the intro video with the like all the sort of apocalyptic explosions and lightning and everything, but actually in the rest of the game, I don't think there's anything that looks quite like that. And it really reminds me of those alien environments of Out of This World. But I think that it's actually quite effective as like a way of bridging the way that the intro sequence looks and the way the rest of the game looks. Because there's some elements that are sort of common to what comes later in the game, but a lot of the elements that you see on the screen there are actually, you know, just totally alien to the rest of the images in the game. So it's kind of like you're in between worlds in a sense. Yeah. So
Mm.
and then at the very end of the game, you actually come back to that same scene, but it's different than the first time you visit there. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So that's interesting. And then we go through the tutorial. The tutorial, like I said, it brings up that text that maybe wasn't in the game originally, but it really felt like the tutorial to like one of the Half-Life games to me, like the obstacle course you go through, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Okay, Gordon, go to this thing." Like it's very very linear, and like everything is gated by the mechanic you need to learn, right?
Mm.
Um,
But I think one of
yeah.
the strongest things about the game is it basically has a few very simple mechanics and not much more to it, and it's just about mastering those mechanics. So the tutorial kind of totally prepares you for the rest of the game after you learn, you know, how to dash, how to shoot, and how to slash.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that, you know, like, yeah, I'm really, like, almost certain that there were no text prompts when that first happened, because it was like, oh, I'm on this ledge, and there's an enemy over there, and I have a gun. What should I do with my gun? I wonder, right? Like, it was one of those kind of things where, like, they put you in an obvious situation with an obvious problem and an obvious solution, and then they just expect you to figure out how to use the mechanic.
Mm.
Yeah, so that was yeah, I thought that worked pretty well. And I think it's interesting because it's like that is probably the only part of the game that is very linear. Um, the rest of the game becomes quite non-linear. It's very much like a hub and spoke kind of system instead of just a straight line. But the tutorial has this like very deliberate design, like, okay, here's problem A, here's solution A, here's problem B, here's solution B. And it just kind of gets you right through it, does the job. There's really nothing too complicated about it. So I think the tutorial works pretty well, except for in one sense. I think that the tutorial doesn't teach you one of the most important sort of design concepts of this game, which is resource management. Like I think resource management is really important in this game. It in a way it kind of feels like a dungeon crawler game to me. Like I mean, you kind of get this in like the early Final Fantasy games where it's like, oh, I got to ration my potions and that kind of thing, right? But like really feels like basic D&D or something like that, where you can explore and get more healing items, but you don't want to just spam heal like ever in the game. Like you always want to be miserly about your healing items. At least that's the way that I played the game. Is like,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's definitely the hard lesson that I learned early on in that game. So when you die, the screen that you were on basically reloads, so the area that you died on, but or you still only have the number of healing items that you had when you entered that area.
yes, that's right. It's when you entered the area. So if you go back to the previous screen, you're like, oh well, I'm down to healing potions. I'll just go back and grab those healing potions back there that I found. And no, they don't come back. Right? They're just gone.
That's
So
right. Now I've heard I can't totally confirm this, but I've heard there's an easy mode, and what the easy mode does pretty much, I think it might be rolled out on PC, is
yeah,
is
yeah.
refill your health.
Um,
Now I might be wrong, but that's
I
something I read about.
okay. I checked out the easy mode today
Oh yeah.
just to see what it was like, and I'm not 100% sure on this. I know for a fact that it doesn't bring back the healing potions you picked up before. So
Okay.
like that those don't come back. It does
Okay.
give you more life stocks to start with, and I think it also gives you a little bit more ammo. Like you have a larger
Right.
clip to start with. Um, but I don't think it refills all of your life when you come back.
Okay.
And so this is a thing where I think this game is very different from Dark Souls. Um, that like Dark Souls, yes, there is an element of resource management in that like you have a certain amount of Estus or whatever, and you want to just like use it sparingly, right? Because you have a certain distance between your bonfire and your objective, which was is the next bonfire, right? And you need to be a little bit careful about using your Estus. But this game is quite different from I think any of the healing mechanics that you find in the Soul series. Because like in Bloodborne, you have to grind for healing items. Is that right?
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. So you can't do that in this game. You don't get your all your healing items back on death. You also don't get a full life bar back on death, which is a thing you get in all the Souls games, I think. Um, and you respawn at the beginning of every screen you go through, right? So I mean, Souls doesn't really have screens, but there are sort of like areas you could imagine they'd put like a little gate or something there if they wanted to design the
Yeah.
game that way.
Yeah, but kind of, I guess the fact that you do respawn within the kind of screen that you just entered does mitigate some of that difficulty a little bit.
Yes.
So, like in most cases, if you're good enough, you can get through at least an area without having to heal.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing is that it mitigates the difficulty in the sense that if you understand the mechanics, it works fine,
hmm,
but you can totally screw yourself too. So, um, if you burn your healing items and then you take a bunch of damage and you go into the next room,
yeah,
then you can really get yourself in trouble. Like you can get to the boss with only one healing stock left or something like that.
Yep,
And I
yep.
know, like, when I was talking to Gary Butterfield about this game when the game launched, that was something that happened to him, and he was really pissed off about it. Um,
Mm.
and I think that the game doesn't do a great job of, like, expressing the idea that this is a resource management game. Um,
Yeah, you've just reminded me that that is exactly what happened to me when I got to the first boss the first time I played it.
yeah,
And basically, I had to get good at that first boss, and be able to kill him with only one healing item. And I had forgotten that. And so after that, I was extremely careful with
yeah,
my hoarding.
yeah. I mean, it teaches you that you need to do this, but it does it in a very unforgiving way, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And like, I think that one of the huge design differences between this game and Souls is that, like, you have a hub in each of the areas, like the west area, north area, east area, south area, right? There's a hub, and then there's sub dungeons that you go through, and like the game in each of those sub dungeons. So like if you go back to the main hub of an area and you like use the teleporter thing, then it will respawn all of the healing items and all of the enemies in the entire area, right?
yeah,
Or in the entire game, I should say. And like each of the sub dungeons is not just a collection of rooms you have to go through. It's like a challenge over the entire sub dungeon. It's like this is a level of the game in a sense, right? Like you need to manage your healing items over that entire course until you can get back to the healing thing. And I think the reason why there's like this emphasis on scarcity and on resource management is to encourage exploration, because there is that sort of element of exploration you can get from Zelda, but unlike Zelda, this is not a game that has a variety of items to find, right? Like the
yeah.
only items you're going to
Oh,
find are money and health, right?
Oh
Um,
man, if you could slash bushes and get health back in this game, oh my gosh.
yeah, and you'd never bother looking for those healing items, right? Because you just be like, oh well, whatever, like
Exactly.
who cares, right? And if you could get money from bushes, it'd be the same thing, right? You get ammo from
Uh,
bushes. You get ammo from slashing things, which is an
yeah.
interesting mechanic. And I'm glad that they didn't hide the ammo somewhere. That would
Mm,
really, I think that would have really hurt the experience a lot if ammo was like money and health.
mm.
Because I think that it's really fun. The sort of like managing your ammo versus using your sword and the risk reward
Yeah.
that introduces, I think is really really fun in this game. And if ammo was just a pickup, I think that would really hurt the combat a lot.
Yeah, that's definitely something I appreciated this second time. Fighting a boss and, shooting him first and then going in for some close slashes. And when you make contact with an enemy, it also kind of refills your ammo.
Yeah,
And then running away to kind of shoot again. It was a really nice loop that you can get into.
yeah, it feels so good. Like just the combat in this game is so good. Yeah, it's just like I love that risk reward.
Yeah.
I love the animations in combat, and I love the sound design in this game. Like all of the attacks and like the effects just sound so good. Like it's so
Yeah.
satisfying to hit things in this game, and you like shoot your gun. Like everything sounds fantastic. Um, yeah,
Cool.
and
Yeah.
yeah. So
So,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, just going back to the point that you were saying also about having to explore to find healing items. They actually it's so much a part of the game that you will explore areas and even go down elevators, and all you'll find is a healing item. Like
Yeah,
it's so much a part of the game that they've hidden them in these secret rooms off to the side. It's really core to it.
yeah, and I think the interesting thing about that element of the game is that they put enough of them in the game that even if you miss some of them, you're still gonna have enough. Like as long as you're careful with your resources, and I mean, like as you get better at the game, it becomes less and less of an issue. Like I've run through this game many times now, and like on my last run through the game, almost all the time I would be at like full healing items or one down, but I would never
Yeah.
really be any lower than that, except in like very exceptional circumstances. But you know, the first time I went through the game, it was a lot. I had to rely on healing items a lot more, but I still never felt like, oh no, like there's just nothing for me to find. And I wasn't. I'm not very good at exploration in this game. Like I find that I miss a lot of things because I've never used an FAQ or anything to get through this game. But I still found like there was enough there for me that I was never like I was encouraged to explore, but I never felt like, oh no, I need to spend like 40 minutes doing wall humping to find a healing item or I'm totally screwed, right? Like that's
That
yeah.
is my biggest problem with the game is that I feel like some of the secrets really could be telegraphed a bit better because yeah, you like you said, you spend half your time if you're looking for secrets, kind of walking up to a wall and just seeing if you can push through it. And sometimes there's kind of clear environmental telegraphs, but other times those same telegraphs are used and don't represent a hidden wall or a secret or whatever. So you
Yeah.
kind of that would be my biggest criticism of the game is that sometimes I was just kind of wasting my time pushing up against walls because I wanted to uncover all the secret stuff that it had. And it is really rewarding when you do find a cool one.
Yeah.
There's ones to look out for where you're. We haven't really described the little buddy that you have, your little navi.
Right.
Um, yeah, that you that can sometimes show you where a hidden path is, and you can jump over to them. But yeah, like that's if I could change anything in this game, it would be a slightly better telegraphing of some of that secret stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's kind of it's really a question of who they're targeting with that element of the game. Like I think there's probably an element of the audience that enjoys that kind of like just like, you know, using determination to find these really hidden things. Um but I'm really not a part of that group. I don't enjoy that kind of thing all that much. And I find
Yeah.
like, even though I've played through this game like 6 or 7 times now, I never like get that engaged in the collectathon element of the game. And I actually, it's like every time I go through the game, I might find like a different few things than I did the last time, but it's never what I'm really that interested in. I'm more interested in just like doing the combat, you know, doing enough exploration to get the items I need, and and just like, you know, getting to the next area because it looks cool and the music is fantastic and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, the only thing is, like, I mean, I loved stumbling upon when you'd find a secret area and that area told a story. Like you'd stumble upon like
oh
what looked
yes,
like a bar, and there were people massacred on the floor, and you're like, "Holy shit, this is incredible!" And I could have totally missed this.
yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the actual areas of the game then.
Yeah. Oh, something we should probably mention as well is that your character is sick. Your character's
Yes,
ill
yes.
and spitting blood. From time to time, the screen gets really glitchy, and your character slows down and kind of coughs blood on the floor, and it's clear that something's very, very wrong.
Yeah, that's it's pretty core to the game. Both because like that is the character's motivation. The character's motivation is to find a cure for the sickness that he
Mm.
has, and also because like that is basically the inspiration for the game, right?
Yep.
The creator of this game, Alex Preston, has a you know, serious sort of chronic illness, congenital heart disease, and his experience with illness throughout his life was the kind of like core inspiration for this project. So the Drifter is a kind of self-insert character to some extent, And it the game is definitely focused on questions of like mortality, and confronting death, right? Like confronting death that is, because of illness that is coming, right? It's not like just confronting big terrifying enemies that can kill you. It's also like that sort of like dread of a death that is coming, and there's nothing you can do to really avoid except for desperately searching for some kind of alternative.
Yeah, there's that repeated image throughout the game where he's being pulled down by these weeds as he's reaching up to this symbol in the sky,
Yeah.
which you kind of have to assume is him reaching for a cure or something.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. That's what it is. And that symbol just kind of reminds me of EDM covers, but it's kind of beside the point.
And at the end of the tutorial, you kind of pass out. You get so sick that you pass out, and you're discovered by another drifter who
Yes.
nurses you to health.
Yes. And it seems like all of the drifters are sick, right? Like
Mm.
that's kind of a like prerequisite for becoming a drifter, is that you are looking for a cure to this disease. Um, because the other drifter, the drifter in pink, is also sick. But he sort of takes you in. There's like a little campfire scene, which seems like it's maybe in somewhere in the west area of the game, judging on the color of the trees. And then he takes.
I've just realized what's with the campfires. Like that campfire imagery was really significant in Shovel Knight as well.
You're right. That's
Realized they're so similar, and they're both Kickstarter games with a retro aesthetic.
Yeah, that is really interesting because campfires aren't
I don't
really
know.
that important in NES games, right? Like,
No, but Monkey Island 2 has that. It kind of starts with that beautiful campfire scene. That's really quite pixely. I think it's just stuck in the subconscious somewhere.
yeah, I think so. I think it probably has a lot to do with that sort of idea of having the character in a huge like gloomy forest that he
Mm.
mentioned in the Kickstarter. Like that, if you're gonna do a gloomy forest, you're probably gonna do a campfire too. But yeah, why is that a thing that goes like across
Shovel
games?
Knight.
That's kind of interesting because yeah, like you have games like Zelda, right? Is about
Yeah.
adventure, and like it's about like Miyamoto's experience as a kid going off into the hills and stuff, but there's no campfires in that game.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting that like it's a thing that was in sort of PC games, and then it came up in all these sort of retro games, but it wasn't
Mm.
really a thing in NES games. Um,
Or we just say it's Dark Souls.
oh yeah, totally. It could. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'm kind of so on that. Um, yeah, I think it's such a ubiquitous thing to like anything to do with D&D that
Yeah.
maybe it's not just Dark Souls.
Yeah. No, no,
uh,
I'm being absolutely facetious. Yeah.
oh yeah. Okay. Right. So yeah, so the other drifter, he takes you to his house and lets you recover there, and then he kind of goes off to continue his adventures. Um, and it's like when I first saw the other drifter, I was like, "Whoa! Like, am I gonna like have another character that I fight with at some point? Like, is he gonna help me out sometime?" Like, I was sort of like, "Oh, I don't even like what could this possibly mean? Like, what am I doing in his house, and what is this gonna do with the gameplay?" But his house isn't really that important to the game. There's the clothes rack inside of his house that can where you can change costumes once you get his cloak, or also when you complete some of the side challenge content in the game.
I missed that. Oh, that's hilarious. And some text came up today when I was,
Yeah,
oh, yesterday when I was playing it and said, you can change back at the house. And I went back to the house and couldn't work out how to do it. It really doesn't tell you very, very well. Oh, that's cool. So yeah,
yeah,
you got
yeah.
to,
So like for instance, when you find the other drifter at the end of the game and he dies, spoilers. You get his cloak and you can go back to his house and change into it, and it has some mechanical benefits that it gives you. Each of the cloaks give you different bonuses, and also when you do New Game Plus, you have a different color cloak that you get. There's another one you get from doing the dashing challenge in the like dash store. If you do it like I think it's like 800 times you do the dash, then you can get another cloak that gives you some bonus to that. Yeah, which is like really hard. I've done the like
yeah.
lower level challenge where you do it 100 times, but I've never
No
done
way.
that one. And like there are sort of like really gimmicky ways that people get around it. Like basically what I saw online is that you use like a keyboard instead of using a controller because the left right buttons are more reliable. They're sort of like very digital, just like they're like discrete from each other. Like you press left, you're only going to press left. You're never going to press up. You're never going to press down, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you're never going to press right. So you just dash back and forth over the recharge pad 800 times. And actually, like there are people who have like created like input macros to do it for you. And other people will use a metronome to keep time so that
Yeah,
they,
that's
they
smart.
stay on the beat, right? To make sure that they do it right. It really reminds me of that thing you need to do to get Lulu's ultimate weapon in Final Fantasy X with the lightning. Um, if you ever played that game. Um,
No, never played the Final Fantasy X, but
Yeah, there's
no,
there's an
but
area where you have to dodge lightning bolts, and it's like on a rhythm. So,
right. I found the dashing to be probably my most significant power up. I think that when you can chain the dashes,
oh yeah,
um, and it's core to the game. It's such a cool move. I don't think I'm amazed that you got 100. I don't think I ever got more than 4 or 5 in a go
well,
before I lost it.
that is why you play on PC. So you're playing on PS4, and I believe it's locked at 30 frames per second on PS4 still.
Yep.
But because there was such a enormous like outrage from the player community when this game was released that it was only 30 frames per second. And like the game just got absolutely slammed for that. Um, the developer spent something like 3 months recoding the game, even though actually it is like Game Maker, the engine is made in, is like kind of locked to 30. You can do like tricks where you sort of like reprogram every element in the game to like double so that it runs at 60 or something like that.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, it was must have been an absolute nightmare to do. So I really appreciate the fact that they did it because I never expected them to do it. I thought it would just be way too much work and they would never do it. But they actually did. Unfortunately, that is a feature that is only available on PC right now. And I'd say that the two things that it really changes is one being able to hit projectiles out of the air with your sword once you get that upgrade, and the other is being able to dash more reliably, like chain dash more reliably. Because like I didn't really have any trouble beating the game on 30 frames per second, but there are some elements of the game that I felt were um, very difficult or unreliable to use at 30 frames per second that became a lot more reliable once I got up to 60.
Mm.
And the other thing to say about that is that I was having a lot of sort of frame rate issues. You might see it actually in the video that is playing right now in the east area of the game. When I recorded this and when I did my latest run, and like I measured it, and it was like I was at 60, but then I would usually be down at like 55 frames per second, and whenever assets were loading, because they kind of dynamically load on the fly, it would drop down to around like 42 frames per second. So it was really like jarring, and quite distracting. But I found out what the problem was, which was that my game was installed to my spinning disk drive, um, and this game doesn't actually cache the assets as far as I can tell. Like it doesn't do pre-caching in memory, which is kind of ridiculous because I have enough RAM on this computer that I could load the entire game into memory like 6 times over. But I assume that's a limitation with Game Maker more than anything
Yeah,
else.
yeah,
Um,
probably.
yeah, so if you are running at 60 frames per second, you pretty much need to use an SSD drive, because once I transfer the game over to my SSD drive instead of my spinning disk drive, I was getting like solid 60 frames per second, like locked, never dropping at all. Um, so that makes an enormous difference on the PC version, and definitely something people should look out for, because it is really frustrating in that east area when you're just like running like the frame rate is really unreliable. Um,
Yeah, and then you've got to play like one of us PS4 plebs.
well, no, because I mean it's not so bad if you lock it at 30, right? It's like, oh well,
Yeah,
at least it's a reliable frame rate, right? But if it's
yeah,
going between 40 and 60 constantly, then you're just like, like my brain, it can't do the thing. Um, yeah. So anyway, long and short of it is, play the game on PC and play it with an SSD. Um, if you can't play it on PC, then you're gonna have to deal with 30 frames per second, which is not game breaking, but it is a little bit frustrating.
yeah. Look, I've played it through twice on 30, and I thought it was fine. This time I actually tried. I don't think I actually got that that deflecting, the sword deflect, bullet deflecting upgrade last game.
Okay.
Um, and I finally did it this game, and I actually found it almost invaluable against some of those robot enemies later on.
Oh,
So,
and it's so much fun to use too,
oh,
isn't it? Just
really
like when
good.
you bat those
Yeah.
projectiles back at the enemies, you feel like such a badass.
Yeah,
Um,
and then I was using it against bosses, and I'm like, man, yeah, I could have made my first playthrough so much easier.
yeah, it's especially useful against the final boss,
Yes.
because when he does that big wave attack, you can just kind of bat a lot of the projectiles out of the way. Um,
Mm.
yeah. Okay. So that's kind of like the town. There's like a number of shops, and you can buy sword upgrades, you can buy dash upgrades, you can buy grenades and more health items, and you can get gun upgrades as well. Um, and aside from that, there's some people you can talk to. Like one of them talks to you about how they were saved by the other drifter, um,
Mm.
and another one tells you like how they were kind of like robbed, like mugged by some people in town. Um, so like you can't actually do anything about that, but I think it's like establishing this part of the game where it's like all the characters are sort of like cute forest animals, right?
Yeah.
Like they're all anthropomorphized animals. Like your character's kind of like a kitty dude.
Which
Uh,
makes all the slaughter so much sadder.
yes, right. Like it's this combination of really cutesy characters with this very somber and like bloody environment. Like there's
Mm.
ruins everywhere, but there's also corpses everywhere, blood and just like signs of like genocide like everywhere you go to, right?
Yeah,
Especially when we get
totally.
into the east area where there's just these huge piles of otter corpses and the frog. Like when you first get into the east area, like there's that frog man who just like throws the corpse of an otter onto this pile,
Yeah.
um, and it's like, oh man, like this is intense.
Now,
So
was it just me? I thought I noticed that as you cleared out each area, does the hub area in the middle get more populated?
not that I know of. I don't think
Okay,
it
because I
does, but
kind
you
of
could be
felt like
right.
it. I kind of felt like it felt more enlivened as I cleared out each area, but I might be totally wrong there. But it was something that I just kind of, yeah, semi noticed. Not more characters that you can necessarily talk to,
Right.
but just like more characters in the space and kind of more animals jumping around and stuff.
Huh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's true. But
I
it's
could
not
just
something
be
I
making it up
noticed,
to
but
confuse
like
everyone.
if that is true, I like it. That's a cool thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, all right. So one last thing to say about the town in the center of the game. I think there was a really bad gaffe in terms of the developers trying to communicate something to you. Um, so when you're in the other drifter's house, he gives you this item that sort of like tells you like this is what you need to do in the game. There are these like energy cores and you need to collect them. And when you collect enough of them, like they'll fill up the cores in the middle of town, and then you can do a thing, right? There's that image that comes up to explain it to you, right?
Mm.
Uh, but it the thing that's like showing you how to fill in the cores is pointing to the north core, which for me indicated to me that I needed to go to the north area. So the first time I played this game, I started with the north area because it was like, oh, there was like a box telling me that's where I need to go. But when you actually go out into the city, there's a little dog, and the dog walks over to the east area, and you're supposed to follow the dog and then be like, oh, I guess this is where I go. But there's also that thing that's like indicating to you I should go north. So I think there's a really like bad communication problem there because the north area is really hard. And I really like bang my head up against a wall fighting the north boss first. When I first started playing this game because like he's pretty
Is it?
tough.
Is that the Crow boss?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's the hardest boss in the game, personally.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think so too.
And that was the first way you went, far out.
Yeah, it's like because of that box thing, and like I think that happens to a lot of people. It's the most charitable thing I can say about it is that it's very similar to how in Dark Souls 1, when you're at Firelink Shrine, the way the camera is framed at the beginning, it suggests you should go to the catacombs, but
Yep.
actually you need to go over to the aqueduct at the beginning. And like people are like, "Oh wow, this is so cool! I love Dark Souls so much for this thing of like throwing a diversion at the player and making them go to this area that is gated by really hard enemies." And like obviously the skeletons at the start of Dark Souls 1 will just kick your ass if you try to go kill them at the very beginning of the game. But for whatever reason, I if that was what the developers were going for, which I kind of doubt, like I don't even know if that was an intentional thing in Dark Souls 1. Uh, it doesn't work as well here. I think a lot of people were really frustrated and actually quit playing the game because it was like I need to go north, and then they go north, and then it's like, oh, I just lost against this boss who's super hard, and there's nothing I can do, and I'm gonna quit and go play something else, which I think is a shame. Um,
And look, but again, this harkens back to that kind of 8-bit era
yeah,
where
true.
with something like Mega Man, you didn't know what order to play those levels in, and depending on which bosses you'd beaten,
Yeah,
would influence how difficult the next area was. So I think it's quite deliberate that they would want you to go in the wrong direction because it's what we were doing back then.
that's possible. Yeah, and I mean, you'll have to like correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I'm like because I'm not really a big fan of Zelda games, but as far as I remember, in Link to the Past, there was some flexibility with which dungeon order you would do as well, right? Is
Oh, I'm trying to remember. There was it kind of, yes, kind of.
Yeah, I think it was like a
More
limited,
more
but there were
so
some
Zelda
cases where
one.
you could kind of do it.
Yeah, in Zelda one, the very first one, Link to no, the very first one, Legend of Zelda. You could pretty
Right.
much go to any dungeon you wanted at any time and get your ass kicked.
Yeah, actually, you know what? That is a much better reference. I was just thinking about Link to the Past because that's what the developer
That's what
mentioned
they
in his
reference.
Kickstarter, but
Yeah,
really that's more of a Zelda 1 thing.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. And this game does have that aspect of The Legend of Zelda to it, I think.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, yeah, so we're going to go to the East area. The East area is a very, like, well, there's one thing I should say before we get there. There's like a sort of like ring of in between areas, like between connecting the hub and then like the different worlds around it, right? Like the west area, east area, north area. There's like a transition zone between each of those areas. And if you look in the transition zone, I think especially on the west side of town, you can see that there are like all of these corpses in the water, and this red water, and I think that's actually the same water that you see in the intro cinematic,
Mm.
where there's like that sort of ocean of corpses that you're standing in. Um, so that's kind of interesting that they like carried that over from the intro into the game. But nothing really too interesting about those transition areas. Um, so yeah, if we go to the east area, it's this. It's basically the water temple, like quote unquote, right? Um,
Mm.
so this is an area that was inhabited by a bunch of otter people, and they were attacked by evil frog people. And the frog people have taken over, and they have like massacred all of the otter people, and there's just like otter corpses everywhere you go. Um, so the frogs, they come in like, I think, two varieties. There is the ninja frogs, and then there is the like alchemist frogs, right? Like there's the ones who jump around and throw shurikens at you, and then
Yep.
there's the other ones who throw vials at you that explode and shoot fire around. And then you also fight some of the goblin characters. I guess that's what in my head they're sort of like orcs or goblins or something, like the
Mm.
generic enemies that show up in every area. With the either the ones who jump at you or the ones with rifles that shoot at you. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. They were in most of the areas, weren't they?
well, there's actually an explanation for that that comes up in the south area. So
Okay.
we can talk about that then. But yes, they are in every area in the game to varying degrees. But you know, they're usually like the supporting enemies that they throw in with the like enemy that is specific to that area.
Mm.
Um, okay. Um, Oh yeah, and there's this part where you go into the temple, you like talk to the person who tells you what happened there, and you go past there, and then like you go past this like giant that has been like this giant mech monster thing that has been like has fallen into this reservoir and is dead. You go past its corpse. It's very atmospheric. Um, and then you go down into like a facility that is like beneath the reservoir that this waterfall is pouring into. Um, and it seems to me that like when you see the otter corpses that are like floating in the water outside of that reservoir, like there's this really great scene where you're walking by this like window that is looking out into the reservoir, and there's like this floating corpse there. I don't know if you remember that one, but that was
Mm.
really like memorable to me. Like, oh man, that's so gross. Um, it seems to me that like actually the frogs have just been like taking the otter corpses and throwing them into the water, and then like they've just been like washed down into the reservoir by the current, like down the waterfall, and like now they're just all accumulating in this reservoir here. um
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like ugh, ugh. So yeah, it's that cute thing but then also extremely grim. um yeah, so yeah, I think like the art in this area is like there's a lot of like gradients of green and blue that you see, and also the trees are all sort of this lush green. So it feels like the area that's sort of the most like vibrant and alive out of all the different areas in the game.
Mm.
Um, yep. And so, what did you think about the enemies in this area? There's the ninjas and
Uh,
the alchemists.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I think the alchemists were probably the ones that I found to be the trickiest at first to kind of work out what the strategy was.
Right.
Um, and this is also the part most people will play this area first because if you're like me, you probably check a forum and go, which order should I do these in?
Yeah.
And then people will say east, north, west, south. And so yeah, so this is kind of where you're learning. So you're kind of learning that um, against the feral troll style enemies, you know, the ones that claw at you.
Mhm.
Against those, they were actually quite tricky at first as well because I wasn't sure how many slashes of my sword I could get in before I have to restart it. Like you kind of, I think you can get kind of three slashes in before you have to take a pause.
Yes, that's right. You get
Um,
3 slashes. So like those like trolls or orcs or whatever you want to call them, like the ones that
yeah,
leap at you,
those,
they
yeah,
they have 3 hit points. So the idea is like you dodge out of the way of them, and then you can do 1, 2, 3, and they die, right?
yeah.
But if you walk up and attack them, then they'll hit you, and you'll like you won't be able to get 3 hits in before they finish their warm up or their wind up to their attack.
Exactly, and so that's what this kind of area and its enemies represented to me was just kind of learning the basics of how to take down these different kinds of enemies, how to use your gun, things like that. So yeah, I thought it's quite good, well pitched difficulty level there.
Yeah, I think like one thing about the enemies in this game is that, and this is a good thing, they're very predictable, right?
Mm.
Like their behavior is extremely like predictable. Like okay, it's those troll guys that jump at me. They're always going to just walk up to me, and then if I get close enough, they're gonna proc, and then they're gonna warm up, and then they're gonna jump and attack me, and I dodge out of the way and hit them. It's like okay,
Yeah.
that's it. That's all there is to it, right? Um, Pretty much like they have a behavior where if you fight large hordes of them and you kill a whole bunch of them, then the last one like freaks out
Oh
and like
yes, that's
his
funny
little like
way.
sweat drops start coming off of him and he runs away in a corner. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's like the only behavior they have that's like unusual, but it's not a hostile behavior. It doesn't actually like it's not a different kind of attack that they can just like pull out of their ass and use to attack you.
Well, it
Uh,
was hostile for me once because I once followed one into a trap
that
effectively, so he was running
yes, that
away.
is a thing they do
Yeah.
in like I think it's in the west area.
Right.
Yeah, and that was fun. But for the most part, like at this point, they're training you like, oh, I killed all these guys, and now I could like chase this guy down and kill him. And it's kind of like this sort of like sick satisfaction you can get from like, in that sense, I think they're very similar to the Fallen in Diablo 2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
think the Toad samurais are probably I think the most amusingly designed characters in the game. Like
right,
they're just Toad samurais. They're just toads wearing like Japanese style hats
yeah,
and
those,
throwing shurikens.
yeah, yeah.
They're
Uh,
really endearing and are quite a bit of fun to fight as well.
yeah, because they're very easy. Because they only have 2 hit points, right? When you are facing them in small numbers, but when you get to one of the arenas, like actually one of the ones that is up on the screen right now, um, they can like, especially the one that is, I think, late in this area near the boss. They come at you in a huge amount of numbers, so they can actually be very deadly if you don't have a good crowd control strategy.
Mm.
So yeah, so I think they're quite versatile in the sense that in small numbers they're very very easy to kill, but in large numbers they can actually just swarm you and kill you, no problem. Uh, so yeah, so I think they're a good character design and both visually and mechanically. I like how they hop out of the water too. That's great. Like
Yeah,
they
yeah.
ambush you, like come up behind you and stuff like that. And then it's a great thing like playing through the game again when you know they're gonna hop out of the water, and like you just like you keep walking and you know exactly when they're gonna come out, so you just turn around and kill them as soon as they come out of the water. And like that feels like so rewarding. Like oh, like I have game mastery because I know exactly what's gonna happen in this level, right?
Totally.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Okay, so what about the end boss to this area? What did you think about? What do you think about him?
So the end boss to this area, he's like the big toad, isn't he?
Yeah, that's right. He's like a giant alchemist
Uh,
toad.
yeah, yeah, that's right. Look, I think he's the easiest boss in the game. It's just kind of a lot of getting in a few hits and dodging, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, there are the plant type of enemies in this area that I forgot to mention. There's
Oh
the
yeah.
little plants, which are like mimicking the sort of Zelda style like leaf plants, the little bushes that you can hit to get ammo.
And do
Um,
they explode? Do they
yes,
explode when they die?
yeah.
Right.
They if you hit them once, then they'll explode, and sometimes they can cause chain reactions if they're in groups. Um,
Mm.
So there's those plant guys, and then there's the big plant guys that are like they come out of the ground and they like do a big huge dash thing at you, which are they're kind of like the pigs in Bloodborne. Um, yeah, they're those. I think those big plant guys are some of the hardest enemies in the game. Like if you are not like if you're not in the right rhythm dodging them, then you because they have iframes when they're dashing, it can be really hard to kill them, and they do a ton of damage if they hit you. So, um, I actually died to them a couple times in my most recent playthrough. It may have something to do with the frame rate issues I was having, but
Oh yeah. Sorry, I've just remembered these. Yes, they are. They're quite difficult.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So they're they're
They've
interesting.
got six hit points, I think.
Yeah, I think yeah they have 6 hit points. They do a ton of damage. They have iframes when they dash, and they come out of the ground,
Mm.
so it's not too predictable where they're going to come out of. Um,
Yep.
and I think the most effective way to kill them, honestly, is to use your pistol.
Mm.
Um, like you might hit them 1 or 2 times, but just like shooting in rapid succession against them because they're such a big target is very effective. And I found I actually had more trouble with them than normal when I went through this area on my last playthrough because I started with west and then I went north and then I went east. So I was using the plasma pistol through the whole game, and I think the plasma pistol is really not very effective against them because one, it's kind of slow, so you might hit them when they're in their iframes, and two, even if you do hit them, you have to reload, and you're not going to take off all 6 of their life by hitting them. So I think the basic pistol is really the most effective weapon for killing those guys.
Yeah. Right.
Which is good because this is designed to be the first area in the game. So yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely.
yeah.
And so this boss, this big toad boss, actually throws some of those plants at you, doesn't he? The small ones.
He throws. Yeah. I think it's like he throws the big vials at you that explode, and then
Ah,
either they come out of the ground or he throws them at you. I forget exactly what it is, but yeah, like you can hit them. Like if you can predict where he's going to jump with his leap attack,
mm,
you can time hitting those little plant guys, and then he will leap onto the plant guys as they explode. And then he'll get like knocked down, and he's just prone, and you can beat the crap out of him. Um,
yep.
so like my basic strategy for taking that guy down was like, hit the plant, he jumps over, he gets knocked down, and then I would like do like 1, 2, 3 hit, shoot him with the plasma pistol, 1, 2, 3 while it's reloading, then hit him with the plasma pistol again, and just keep doing that until he recovered. And I killed him. I think my first try this time because and it was like really fast, like because plasma pistol is really strong. So um, that was
Interestingly, I think when you asked me how what I thought of the boss, I actually couldn't remember him. I think he's actually my probably the least memorable boss in the game.
yeah. I think
And
he's just there
maybe
to
it's because
like
he
this is a boss. Like it's like he's just
yeah.
there to like teach you like oh there are bosses in this game, and like he's also kind of the only boss in the game that has like a very strong environmental gimmick used to kill him. Um,
Mm,
like whereas in the east in the west area when you fight the boss there's like the enemies in the crystals, and they come out and attack you like they do in the rest of the area, but I think this boss is the only boss that's sort of like a gimmick boss in the sense that it's like a Dark Souls gimmick boss where you figure out the gimmick and then he's just really easy after that, right?
Yeah.
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 Okay. So that's, I think, probably enough of the East area. I think the actually the music in the East area is good. They're like one of the things that they do with music in this game that is really great. Is that they dynamically generate the music according to sort of like a preset of different synths. So it's really like a, what does he call it? Disaster Piece did the music for this game, and he says it's reactive. Yeah, the music in this game is reactive. So there's a lot of leitmotifs that come up, especially when like the everything goes like black and everything gets glitchy. There's like a special leitmotif for like, oh no, you're gonna have another one of these attacks. You like as soon as you hear the music, you know that's what's gonna happen, right? It's not just the visual effect. But there's also a whole lot of other things that have are variations on the main theme of the area that come up. So like if you're in a battle, it sort of shifts into a different version of the track that you're listening to. And also in some sort of dungeons, it will do that as well. And I think that's very effective in all the areas of this game, but it worked pretty well in this area especially. Some of the really like weird synths in this area I liked a lot. Some of them sort of sound like horns or something. Yeah. But, maybe not the most memorable music in the game. So then we go to the north area, which is the mountaintop area of the game, and it's filled with bird people. And it's like, they're like evil religious bird people who have driven out the other bird people. It's not like frogs and otters. It's like bird people A versus bird people B.
Yeah, kind of like they do a genocide against their own people in a way. It's quite dark.
Yeah. There's that one guy in the secret area you can find that tells you what happened, and he's like, it's super cute actually. Like, okay, because there's the scene where he tells you about like the sort of evil genocide kind of like, like religious inquisition or something they impose there. But there's like, he's like a bird guy in a poncho, and then he's like saved some of the birds from the hatchery of like the like previous inhabitants of the area, and like they're little tiny birds and they all have little tiny ponchos on. Yeah, that's so cute. I like that a lot.
And what did you think of what did you think of that conversation, the conversation design, the way that it's, there's no text, it's just like a comic speech bubble but with images in it. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it mostly works. There are a couple of cases where it's sort of like, what was that about? But like,
Yep.
I almost always got the idea. Like it was yeah, I think the ones that don't work that well are like the ones in town. And then also the one when the other drifter dies. It's sort of like, I think I kind of understand what your story is, but it's a little bit unclear. So yeah,
I think it's kind of my thesis, I guess, for the whole thing is that I think the games, it kind of is much better at evoking emotions than it is at necessarily telling a story, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I like them. I like them as little evocative, image sets. And I don't mind that I'm not exactly following the story. If this was a 30-hour game, I'd feel quite differently.
I'm so glad it's not a 30-hour game.
No,
if it was a 30-hour game, my opinion of this game would be much lower than it is.
Exactly.
Like it's like a perfect length, like like 6 to 10 hours. Like like you said, this game has like a very basic set of mechanics, and it just executes on them very well. But I think they would wear out their welcome if it was like, oh, you finished the first 4 areas. now the evil wizard shows up and teleports you to the nether realm, and now you have to do like
Yeah.
another 6 areas. Wow. Like, I'm so glad they didn't do any of that padding crap in this game. um yeah, so I think, yeah, if it was trying to tell like an epic story, um it would be a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it works for what it's trying to do.
Totally. Now
Yeah.
the crow people, I really like. So the crow area is really interesting. I really like. There's these crow enemies that the ones that swoop down
Yeah.
to attack you. I
Yeah.
love them because I love an enemy where you can't really attack them when they're above, and you have to time your attack perfectly
Yes.
to actually kill them. And when you do time it, it's almost an instant kill. I think they've only got one hit point.
They only have one hit
Um,
point. That's right. And
yeah.
um it's, I think in a way they're like a better execution on the concept behind the big plant enemies in the east area, like where
Mm,
they have like that kind of iframe thing when they're dashing,
yeah.
but it's a lot more forgiving. Of course, they're mainly dangerous when they're in like flocks.
Yeah.
There's one area in particular, like one of the sort of battle arenas you get into, where they like show up out of nowhere, and there's like 10 of them or something that come after you.
Yeah.
And if you're using the pistol or the shotgun, it's really easy to kill them. But I was using the plasma pistol, and they just swarm me to death. Because I was like, I shot and I killed like 2 or 3 of them, and then the rest of them just swarm me. So, so yeah, I think they're interesting in that they like force you to use certain weapons to attack them. If there's just 1 or 2 of them, you can kind of dash away from their dive on the same line of attack that they're doing, and hit
Mm.
them as soon as they are like sort of taking off again. And it's pretty effective. But when you get into swarms of them, you pretty much just have to use the pistol and just start shooting like crazy, or use the shotgun and hit a whole bunch of them in one go.
I don't think I shot any of them. I think I'm a bit funny with guns in games in that I like to hoard my ammo just in case because I never know what's coming around the corner.
Oh,
So I think,
okay. So the thing for me is like I do the same thing, but once I get the move that lets me hit the projectiles back at the enemy with the sword, I just
yeah,
like I never use the gun. Like almost
right.
never use the gun, to the point that it brings up the hint in the game where it's like, your ammo is full and you can shoot a gun, right? Like there's a little text bubble that comes up at the bottom if you haven't shot your gun in a really long time.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so you killed them all with your sword?
Yeah, I was a slashy boy. I slashed them and they died. It was good.
Yeah, I
I
think
like.
it's
Oh, yeah,
it's
go
quite
on.
possible to do that. There was just that one area in the game, where you get swarmed by so many of them, that I
Yeah.
found pretty difficult to do with the sword, and just was like, you know what? Just took out the pistol and bam, 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 bam. They're all dead. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do find it quite difficult to aim actually in this game. I don't think it's the easiest game to aim in. I ended
that's
up
yeah.
relying quite heavily on the rifle that has the laser pointer.
Oh, the sniper rifle.
Yeah, so I ended up using that quite a bit because I was really bad at aiming, and so that one just kind of gives you a direct line that shows you exactly where you're aiming at. That really helped me out. So yeah, that might
Yeah.
be another reason I didn't use the gun very much.
Um, I really like the way shooting works in this game. It's so good. Like it's another part of the mechanics that I think is awesome, because if you're firing from the hip, like if you're just shooting in a direction, I feel like it implements in the mechanics so well the um the sort of sensation of firing from the hip. Like, I don't know where this is gonna go. I'm just gonna try shooting in the general direction,
Yeah, I
right?
was
Like,
so bad at that. I was so bad at that. And if you do aim, when you do aim, it actually stops you. Your character can't
yes,
move if you're aiming the gun. So
yes,
that's great. Again, I mean, I've got no problem with the shooting mechanic. I was just very bad at it.
yeah. I got better at it as time went on. Is what I'll say about that. Is I got used to it. I'm not saying my accuracy is perfect, but a lot of using the gun is not even aiming at enemies. Like I would do that sometimes, but a lot of the gun is just like you do your 1, 2, 3 hit with your sword, and then you can combo that into a shot, either like one shot from the plasma pistol or a bunch of shots from your other pistol. And that increases your damage output so much. And when you're doing that, you can just fire from the hip because you're standing right beside the enemy, so you're always going to hit them at point blank range. So yeah, I love the way that the sword and the guns work together in this game with the combat. It's so good. Yeah. But
you're making me want to play it again now. I feel like I'm learning a few moves that I hadn't tried out. And I'm like, damn it, why didn't I do that?
and I mean
Time for New Game Plus.
like I actually haven't played Bloodborne because I don't have a PS4, but that feels like such a Bloodborne thing to me. Like hit, and then like switch to your gun and shoot them, or shoot them and then hit them with your sword. You know, yeah, so good. All right, so yeah, so there's the swooping bird enemies, and then there are other bird enemies. There's the wizard birds, right? There's like the ones who shoot in like a straight line with like a kind of spike. Like you can see where it's going to show up, and then it shows up and it does quite a bit of damage. And then there's the other birds, the big birds, who can like do it like a square of the ground that they hit you with, or they can send projectiles that are homing against you. And I think like the big birds are pretty cool because they teach you the attacks that the boss is going to use.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love that it's like foreshadowing the boss fight, because the boss fight is so hard that like sort of having some experience with the attacks he's going to use is you know, rewarding in some sense. It's like, oh, okay, I kind of know what's happening. I don't just feel totally overwhelmed by this fight. This area has more platforming and sort of dexterity-based stuff than the other areas in the game. There's like those big blocks that move around that you have to sort of dash past in kind of like Mega Man style. What did you think about that? Was that difficult, or was that like just okay?
I'm a platformer at heart, so for me that stuff was super easy. Easy to time, and they didn't overuse it. I think when they kind of tried something a little bit different in each area with it, whether you needed to kind of, you know, find a place to hide, or whether you needed to duck down the bottom, or
yes,
you know, those were quite interesting. This playthrough, I don't think I died to them once. How about you? How did you find it?
I'm really bad at those kind of things in Mega Man. But I found them to be pretty reasonable. Like, when I first started playing, I died to them a few times, but I think on this playthrough, I didn't die once to them, no.
And the dash is built for this. And
yes.
I probably had updated my to the double dash by this point anyway, and that just
the
double dash is very powerful.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. The first time I went through that area, I only had the single dash, so it made it a little bit more difficult, but again, it's not unreasonable. Like, compared to Mega Man, I found, like, or, you know, I'm thinking more of Mega Man X than the original Mega Man games, but I found it to be pretty easy. And yeah, and it just adds a little bit of variety to the game, like, because the other areas in the game don't have really a mechanic like that that you have to worry about. There's also some, like, areas where the floor will fall away if you stand on it too long. And, you know...
Is that in this area?
Yeah, it shows up in both the north area and the west area.
Yeah, that was annoying at times, actually. I definitely fell down some of those.
But it's so good when, like, the enemies run onto those things, and then they're just like, ah! I love how it works both ways. I'll say that.
Yeah,
and I love how the AI is dumb enough that you can bait them into it sometimes.
Definitely.
Yeah, but... I like also that it's like it just does 1 damage to you. When you're playing on New Game Plus and you only have 2 life, that is a little bit more punishing. But whatever, you know, it's not a big deal because you have your dash, so you can get away from that. It gives you like 3 seconds or something before the platform actually disappears.
Mm.
All right, so last thing maybe to say about this area, the north area, is that the vistas in this area are very impressive. Obviously, it's a mountain area. Um, there's that vista where you can see the giant in the distance, and then when you actually like get up to the top of the mountain, the giant's like right there, and then you go into the dungeon, and like his arm is breaking through the wall. That's
Yeah,
so cool.
yeah, that's cool.
I love
That's really
that.
cool. And something else I really like about these areas is that it's never clear exactly which direction you should go in.
Yes.
So you're always kind of doubling back to kind of see what you missed.
Yes.
And I like that. That's the, really feeds into the non-linearity of it. Even though you've gone up to the northern fork, there's still multiple forks within that area. And that's
Yeah,
really cool.
it's like semi-linear in the sense that like there are some areas that are gated by having energy crystals or whatever you want to call them. Like
Yeah.
you need one to get in this area, or you need three to get into this area. But there's usually like more than you actually need to get through the area because there's
Yeah.
secret ones you can find. Like basically to clear any of the areas completely, you need 8 crystals, but you only need 4 to finish the area to like get to the
Mm.
boss.
I
So,
think the most I ever got was like five. I don't think I ever got any more than five in an area.
yeah, the most I've ever got is 5 too, but the actual number in all the areas is 8 because it's like
Crazy.
there's like the like diamond shape that goes in the middle, but then
Yes.
there's the triangles around that as well that you fill in.
Yeah.
And when you fill in the whole thing, then you've like actually cleared the area. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's like again, I'm not super good at the exploration element of this game, so I yeah, like you, I've only ever got like 5 at the most, I think, or maybe 6 at the most.
Mm.
But yeah, so sometimes you'll like find the side energy crystal, and then it's like, oh, I don't need to go do that other dungeon, which requires 1 crystal to get in, because I already have enough to go fight the boss, right?
But you should probably do it because it's really fun.
Yeah, you can do it like you can have fun either way. You can have fun in the sense that it's like, oh, I found the secret thing, so now I get a shortcut to the boss, or you can have
Yeah.
fun in the sense like, oh, like I got this extra thing, but there's still another dungeon for me to do because it's fun. I like how it's just like it's open in that sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
As much as you know, um, as much as I don't like Dark Souls 2 very much, I think there's similarity in the world design between this game and that game, where it's
Mm.
just like hub and spokes, and then like more spokes, right?
Yeah.
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 Um, all right, so there are some wolves that show up in this area, but they're not super big deal here. I think they're more lethal in the west area. Uh,
Mm.
like the wolves. What did you think of the wolves? Like I think they have 2 hit points and they like leap at you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
they definitely. I think the first time I bumped into them, they took me by surprise and killed me.
yeah,
But I think as soon as you know what their move set is, they're pretty easy to beat.
yeah, and
Um,
they're very, very susceptible to being hit with projectiles, right?
yeah, yeah.
Like if you have pistol shots, you can just kind of spray bullets in their direction and they just die because they don't have very
And they're
much
quite
life.
they're quite quick, aren't they?
Yeah, no, they're very quick. And
Yeah, that's the big threat.
I love the sound they make when they like proc.
Mm.
They make this kind of howling sound, but it's sort of like this distorted synth of a howl. And like they do it from off screen.
Yeah,
So like you can hear them coming, right? And it's like in the north area it's not a big deal, but when you get into the west area and they're like hiding behind trees and stuff and you hear them
yeah,
howling and you're like,
yeah.
"Oh shit, where are they going to come from?" I love that so much. That's so good. Um
Do you ever feel like the game overuses kind of mobs of enemies? Like I feel like there's certain parts where I just feel like, oh, here's another like big mob of enemies, like just 10 wolves at once.
um I think I would say mm,
I can't
maybe
remember
once or
which area.
twice. I'm pretty much okay
Yeah.
with the mobs in this game.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like
I think I was too, but it's definitely a repeated trick that they use.
Oh, for sure. Like it
Yeah,
is the sort of arenas that you fight in where they like close off the doors and then like a whole bunch of enemies come in and you kill them and then like the drifter does this sweet like spin his sword and stab it into the ground move when you kill them.
yeah,
Um,
that's great. It's such a
yeah,
good feeling.
yeah, and it's like, oh, the sound is so good that just like that swing sound when he stabs into the ground, you're like,
That
oh,
animation
it's
is
so
fantastic.
badass.
The first time that happens, you're like, yes, I'm the boss.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
right.
it's like Cloud's sword spinning thing in Final Fantasy VII, but way cooler than that. Um, yeah, so the arenas like they kind of reminded me of the fights in Okami. Um, if you've ever played that game on PS2.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I haven't. No.
Okay, so yeah, basically, like whenever you get into combat, there's just like a wall that shows up around you, and you fight a bunch of enemies in this constrained area. It's kind of a common thing in many character
Yeah, like
action games, like
Bayonetta. Yeah,
Devil May Cry and all that kind of thing. Yeah, and it's like, and it's basically a thing in first person shooters too. Like you can kind of tell when you're coming up to a room, and it's like, oh, there's a bunch of cover here. Obviously, I'm gonna get swarmed by enemies. But I think they did a pretty good job of it in this game. Like that they use it fairly frequently as like in the sense that it's like a core mechanic of the game. Like you're gonna have areas where you do exploration, you're gonna have areas where you do some platforming, and you're gonna have areas that are just arena fights, and then you have bosses. But like I never felt like it wore out the welcome that much because each area has different types of enemies, and they do a lot of interesting things with the terrain. And then they also they tend to ramp up the difficulty over the level so that you're kind of kept on your toes. It's not just like, oh yay, another horde of like 20 goblins attacking me or whatever.
yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah. So that's all good stuff. So I think one thing I noticed about the North area is that the music really reminded me a lot of the soundtrack to Blade Runner.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it sounded a lot like Vangelis's Blade Runner soundtrack, except without any of the jazz elements. It's just like
Mm.
the background like pads and synths and none of that like sweet saxophone playing over top of it. I mean, it works really well in Blade Runner. I don't know how well a saxophone would work in this game. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
no,
really like
it's
that.
not quite a film noir video game.
No,
Um,
it's in a way it's pretty close. It's got that sort of like lone hero kind of thing. But
yeah,
it's definitely not a noir setting. No. Um, yeah.
but that's
So
it's cool. You know what? I have a secret confession here. I really love the music in this game,
yeah.
but I also found it is very sparse. You know, like it's
Yes.
not full on. It's not a driving force. It's a
Absolutely.
very atmospheric. It's more about giving you this sense of the space rather than driving the action, which is very very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, to the degree where you might not even notice that it is dynamic, like
Yes.
it just
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
happens.
Yeah.
And partly because of that, I think I'm tempted quite often to listen to podcasts while I play this game
Right.
because it's really so fun to play. It's very visceral. It's very it's just super super fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, like for about half the playthrough that I've been playing, I've been listening to the Giant Bomb Goddies. Like
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah. I gotta check that
so
out.
yeah, it's really interesting. So there, that's my little confession is that I might not have so much to talk about with the music, which I really love, and I listen to the soundtrack. But I definitely do recommend this as a podcast game because there's no on-screen dialogue to kind of distract you, so you can really do two things at once quite
Y-
easily.
yeah, I mean, I think that it totally works as a podcast game because of that. But I will say that like the music in this game is sort of like half of my enjoyment of the game. Like
Yeah, no,
I own the soundtrack, and I listen to it outside of playing this game sometimes. And I
yeah,
think that particularly the west area track is very very good as like kind of ambient music. It's good for working to and that kind of thing. But really, the soundtrack loses a lot
Mm.
because this game is composed to be to have that dynamic, reactive character to it, where like
Yeah.
what the or like what music is playing is responding to what's happening on screen, and you don't get that if you're just listening to an album.
Yeah.
So I think that the actual album kind of sells short the quality of the music in this game. The
Mm.
other thing I will say about the music is that it's very interesting because um, it has melody in places, but it doesn't have a very strong melody, and it doesn't have percussion very much at all.
Mm.
And I think what's so genius about that is that it is there to create a mood and an atmosphere, and it reminds me of like the music to Blade Runner in that sense, or the music to like Ghost in the Shell 2, or something like that. But actually, the more I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah, the percussion in this game is the player sound effects.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
shooting and the slicing and the sounds that are made when you hit the enemies, that's the percussion. And the rest of the music is reacting to what's happening on screen. And it's just like, I love how it's so effective in the moments when you're just walking around and exploring. It's so downbeat, it's so atmospheric. But when it kicks up in action, it feels tense. Like, like the music kicks up a bit, but then there's also like just the percussion of hitting the enemies, and the sound design on all your attacks and all of the sound effects when you hit the different enemies is so pitch perfect that I think it really creates an interesting like auditory experience, even if it isn't like reminiscent of.
Composed necessarily.
Yeah, it's not reminiscent of 16-bit games in the sense, or
Mm.
8-bit games in the sense that like there's like a very strong melody that's super catchy, and it's just on repeat, and it's really easy to get into. I just think that the way that the sound all works together in this sort of like very gamey, dynamic way in this game is quite innovative and effective. I mean, Mario games do this too. Like some of Koji Kondo's games do this too, where they
Yep.
have reactive music. But I think this game does it in a very atmospheric way that Mario games don't.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, it's almost like there's a real aesthetic harmony going on
Yes.
between the visuals and the sound effects and the music, and it's all working together in a way that's way more effective and unique than a lot of video games at the moment.
Yeah, and I read the interview of Disaster Piece, the composer for music in this game, and he said that synthesis is like musical painting. Um,
Mm.
I think that's so apt to this game. Especially he talks about how like musical impressionism was an influence on him in creating the score for this game, and yeah, that just sort of like painterly quality to all the environments in the game, I think is mirrored
Yeah.
perfectly in the music in the game. But as you said, it is very low key, so if you want to listen to something else, there's nothing stopping you, right?
Mm.
It's not going to take away from the experience that much. You're
No.
not going to have to like stop and be like, oh no, I missed that dialogue. Now I'll never get it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Right. So that's all I wanted to say about the music, really. Okay. So the boss of the North area, as we said, probably the hardest boss in the game.
Yep.
He's this bird wizard guy who shoots projectiles at you, but mainly makes the floor damage you, like in certain
Yep.
patterns. And he calls down those swooping birds to attack you and make things more complicated for you. So you said that you don't use the gun much against the birds. Did you actually kill the birds with your sword while you were fighting the boss?
Yeah, so in general, when I was fighting the boss, I was actually slashing I was obviously using the gun on the because it helps a lot with this guy. But yeah, the swooping birds, I would either time it so that yeah that I killed them, or often they were just getting killed by the boss's attacks.
Right, that is true. That like you can bait them into getting killed by the area of effect magic, effectively that the boss is
Yep,
using.
yep,
So that's one strategy for dealing with them. But the pistol is extremely effective against them. So
man, I need to
um,
try it again.
like I basically the first time I fought him, I think I killed him this time on my second try. Um, the first time I fought him, I was like using my plasma pistol only, and like the one thing about the projectile weapons in this game is you can basically have two queued up, and you can press the switch button to switch between them dynamically.
Mm,
Um, so the first time I fought him, I was using the plasma pistol, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't really working against these birds." So I'd switch, like I would attack him, shoot him with the plasma pistol, and then when the birds showed up, I'd switch to the normal pistol, shoot them, and then go back to the plasma pistol for fighting the boss. And the plasma pistol, if you do take the sort of non-standard um, route through the game and start in the west and then go to the north, the plasma pistol is not good for killing the normal birds in this area, but it is super effective against this boss
mm.
because you can shoot quite accurately at long distances. So when he teleports away, you can just keep on him with your pistol, and he goes down really fast. But really, I think that this boss, like he has that pattern that follows you along the floor and then explodes outward, like that sort of like chaser attack that he does at the
Yep,
beginning. But it's really when you get later into the fight and he can make like half of the entire floor hit you for big
yeah.
damage that he becomes really deadly. And the important
That's the
thing,
worst because you have to change up your entire tactics at that point because up
yes,
until then you've been dashing all over the place to avoid his attacks, and that's very effective.
yeah,
And then I think you get him down to about a third health,
that's right,
and he
yeah.
starts doing this bit where he turns the entire floor into like stripes. And if you dash, you effectively get killed.
Yeah, because
Um,
you're almost guaranteed to fall into one of the squares that is going to be lethal,
yeah.
and they do big damage too.
So you've got to suddenly train yourself to instead walk,
Yes,
which
yeah,
seems insane. After all the panicking dashing you've been doing for the whole boss fight.
yeah, and I mean, like it took me a long time to understand that the first time I fought him. I was like, man, I just can't beat him. And then I was like, oh, what if I just like delicately walked up to him instead of dashing
Yeah,
over like a madman? So I thought that was like a really cool design for this boss, but he is
yeah.
really hard. Fighting that guy on New Game Plus, where getting hit by any of the floor things will kill you instantly, is um, man, it's hard. It's really hard. Like, but like playing him or fighting that guy, it was like definitely beating him on New Game Plus was like one of like the peak gaming experiences of my entire life. I was just like after I beat him, I had such a high where I was just like, I did it, I did it. It's like because if you get killed, like, if you get hit once, you can get hit by his normal projectiles, but you cannot get hit by the floor attacks or you die.
Oh
Um,
man.
so I learned that boss to perfection. I think it's kind of like when Gary on a bonfire side chat talks about fighting Artorias and learning how to kill Artorias,
Yeah.
and just like learning his patterns perfectly, and then you fight him and it feels so great. Um, I've never had that experience because there's a thing about Dark Souls where I basically if you give me the option to bring another person into the fight, like a Sunbro or something, I will almost always take it because I find it's like I hate the run ups in that game so much, and um and I find the Sunbro battles to be actually quite fun. So it's like I could have this fun multiplayer fight against this boss, or I could do all these annoying run ups that drive me crazy. So I feel like I never really get like the full experience out of Dark Souls because it's just like a mental like failing I have where I'm like, oh, I'm of course I'm gonna
You've got
take
to,
the easy way out, right?
you've got to do an offline play, man.
I've done
Because
offline play,
what?
but even offline, like I did Dark Souls 2 offline. I did Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2 offline, but they still
Yeah,
give you like an NPC you can use for the fight.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's like that is less cheap because it's like the NPC is really stupid and all it does is just draw some fire for you. But
Yep.
I was playing a hexer in Dark Souls 2 and having the NPC there was pretty helpful. I did kill some of the bosses without their help, but in Dark Souls 3 it was just like Sunbros all the way. Um, and I'd go back and fight the boss doing like the Sunbro assist for other people like many times because I thought it was so much fun. But like yeah, I feel like I never really got like the definitive Dark Souls boss experience because I just don't have like the willpower to make it happen because I hate run ups. But this game doesn't have run ups. This game has no run
No,
ups and it has no multiplayer. So it's like it
yeah,
forces me. It takes away the thing I hate so much about fighting bosses in Dark Souls, where I can't just like retry right away. And it also it takes away the option of having somebody else help me fight the boss. So like I feel like I kind of got in doing the new game plus battle of the North boss in this game. I felt like I kind of got something like what other people say they like so much about Dark Souls with the boss fights. Because
that's all.
I can't do that experience otherwise.
Now, that's the other thing that Hyperlight Drifter I think does nail. I think every single boss is kind of a beautiful case study in how to do bosses. Really well telegraphed moves,
Yes.
a fixed number of moves, and no really cheap moves. Like everything has, if you die, you died for a reason.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really difficult to balance. And I think they've pretty much nailed it for every boss in this game. And the best Dark Souls bosses are like that. Not that you
Yes.
know some pros, but
Yeah.
but it's yeah, that's the thing that did strike me a lot with this playthrough of Hyperlight Drifter. It does, in a way, it makes the bosses can be, I guess, once you've worked them out, they can be quite easy to a degree,
Oh,
but it's a very
absolutely.
satisfying. It's a really satisfying fight, despite that. You fought it because you know this boss because
Yeah.
you've dodged correctly.
Yeah, it's like if you're playing a fighting game and you understand how the other player plays, right? It's just like once you get it, you can predict what they're going to do and it's just easy, right? Like I think
Yeah,
like I said, I've the when I did my last playthrough of this game, the only boss I had any trouble with was the West boss because it was the first boss I did, and he's pretty hard if you don't have any upgrades other than the dash. Uh, and I'd never actually done that boss like that way before because I'd never started in the West area before. But other than that, I killed all the bosses in like under 3 tries. So yeah, like
mm,
once you learn how to fight the bosses, it's no big deal. And I did the boss rush in like 15 minutes. So I died more on that because I didn't understand that on the boss rush, you have a certain amount of healing items you get at the start that you can use, but then after you use them, they're just gone. So like
yeah,
it's like the rest of the game where you have some resource management to it. But like even with like only 2 healing stocks or 1 healing stock, I could still go through the bosses without too much trouble because I fought them so many times and learned how to do the fight, and once you know it, it's predictable and it's fair and yeah, it's enjoyable.
totally, totally.
Yeah, and I think the North boss, like at first it feels cheap, right? It feels like it's unfair. But once
Yeah,
you understand, like, oh no, I just need to walk in this part, then it's like, oh okay, I got it. Like it's actually it's totally obvious once you think about it.
yeah.
Uh,
That's the best feeling when you think. Like I had this. We'll talk about the last boss soon, but I had that yesterday when I was fighting the last boss. I was like, shit. How did I beat this guy ever? How did I ever do this? This is impossible.
right.
And going from feeling that to absolutely owning the boss
Hmm.
is one of the most rewarding feelings you can get. And there's very few games that manage to balance that well. To enter an arena and go, no, this is impossible,
Yeah.
and then to kind of achieve it, within just by pure fair gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's a very rare thing in games. Um, so why don't we move on to the west area, which is the the forest area, basically the forest temple of this game. And I think this area, like the sort of thesis for this area, is like watch out behind you. This area is all about ambushes, right? Like if the north area is kind of like about platforming ish stuff, and the east area is like let's learn how to play the game. The west area is watch out for ambushes. Um, so like there are a lot of trees everywhere, and the enemies pop out from behind them, and you have wolves coming after you, and enemies that can teleport. I love the west area. I love it so much. I think it has the best music in the game. I really love that track, and I think it's like the just the pacing of the battles in the west area and the exploration in that area is all really rewarding, at least to me.
I think you're right. No, I think the West area is my favorite, and it's got probably one of my favorite enemies in it, which I've got no idea what they're called because there's no text in the game.
Right.
But kind of those samurai guys. Do you know the ones I'm
Right,
talking
like the
about?
the sword wolfmen.
Yes.
Yeah. Or maybe
Yeah,
they're like
I think they're
foxmen. They're some kind of canine thing, right?
yeah, but they're on two legs and they're just they've got big swords and it's kind of like fighting, forest samurai or something.
Yes.
Um, they're just very fun to fight. I just really enjoy them. I like their design. They're quite intimidating physically.
Yes.
And I've really got to exercise that kind of dodge and attack style that I really enjoy. And yeah, they're probably my favorite regular enemies in the game.
Yeah, I mean, again, they're very good at telegraphing what they're going to do. And I mean, it's like, oh, well, if all the enemies telegraph their attacks, how is it fun? Well, the reason why it's fun is because they give you interesting environments and numbers of enemies to fight where the fact that the moves are telegraphed is just like information your brain can instantly process and determine like a path you need to take to avoid with the attack, right? Like
Totally.
because the situation is complex, a very simple enemy can still be a lot of fun.
And especially when they're like you said, like emerging behind you, popping out from behind the bushes as you're taking a walk. Like
Yeah.
that's you're going to get hit unless it's a well telegraphed move. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean they're basically like they're like the leveled up version of those little goblin guys that charge you, but like
Yeah.
they look a lot cooler and I don't know, they're just they're more interesting than their basic mechanical design would suggest.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they've got some really interesting animation. Like they must have just modeled it on Japanese samurai, just the
Yeah.
way that their legs move and their pants and stuff.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
really
good point. So yeah, so there's those guys. Then there are the gun, like samurai guys like
oh
the
yeah.
sort of wolfmen. I like them a lot too. They their attack pattern. I wrote something about it here. Right.
I like hearing your extensive notes being moved.
Yeah. Um,
Paper, man.
yeah. Paper. Who uses that anymore? Um, oh man. Oh yeah, the pistol wolfmen. Yeah, so the big thing about them is that being aggressive really pays off against them, right? So they have like the three shots they can do with their gun, but you can actually hit them out of their attack pattern. So if
Yes.
you just get really up in their face, they're toast. So like I feel like the instinct is to maybe dodge around them, but that isn't the best way to fight them. The best way to fight them is to just like be aggro as hell and go up and beat the crap out of them, which is not a thing you can do against the sword guys, right? Like the sword guys, if you go up to them, they will soak your attack and then hit you. But the gun guys are the opposite of that, and the way that they work in combination with each other, I think, is really fun and effective design.
Totally.
Yeah, and then you have the normal wolves that showed up, which we already talked about. The dungeons in this area, I think, are really cool. Like, there's the forest, and then you go down into like the facilities below the forest. I like that a lot. What did you think about the spike traps in this area? Like those little like crystal things.
No.
If you get over them, then they like kill you like almost instantly.
I think I wasn't a fan when they were really hidden. There's some points where they're there and you just can't quite see them.
Yeah, I only
wasn't a
died
fan of
once in this whole area, and it's quite a large area. I only died once in the whole area, and it was because of a spike trap.
Yeah,
There's one
yeah.
item near the end of the level. It's like up in the top right corner. I think it's like a money you can get, like a credit chip.
Yep.
And it's surrounded by those spike traps. And if you land on any of the spikes and they proc, then you will get hit into more and more spikes, and you're just in a death spiral. There's nothing you can do. So
That's
I mean,
so annoying. Yeah.
it
had
is
that exact
annoying,
same
but
problem.
like it's kind of a Dark Souls fuck you thing. Like it's like, oh, we're gonna put this like one credit chip up here. Is it really worth taking, especially after this super long area? And then you're like, oh,
yeah.
but I want the chip, and then
Yeah.
boom, 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 boom. You just get a death spiral, and yeah, it's kind of funny. There's really large areas in the forest, and a really effective strategy for dealing with them is to just exit the area when you're like halfway done and save. So when you die, like half of the area has been cleared already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that helps a lot in this section. If you're
This was
feeling
definitely my
overwhelmed.
favorite. Yeah, definitely my favorite area to explore as well. Like, there's lots of different forks,
Yes.
lots of different ways you can go, lots of secrets, and it's got that cool feeling. I should have tried that save option, but for me, part of the challenge was clearing out this fork and then kind of doubling back and clearing out the next fork, and that was
Yeah.
really that's really satisfying.
Yeah, this is actually the only area where there's like the teleporter pad that you find about halfway through this area. It's a little bit further in than in most of the areas in the game.
Yeah.
And then you can go south, north, or west. And if you go north or west, both of them lead towards the boss. So
Mm.
it's like the only. I shouldn't say that it's the only one because it's kind of true in the south area too, but
Yeah.
it's like the only one where it's like there's two different ways to get to the end area that are really obvious. So I think that's a pretty cool part of the design in the west area. So then you get to the boss. What did you think of this boss?
You'll have to remind me of this boss. I
Uh,
think I destroyed him. I think I might have like killed him on the first go. So he's basically this like giant crystal man.
He's
With
not a crystal man. He's a giant wolf man.
he's a wolf man.
With the plasma pistol and like the large sort of like semi saber katana ish sword.
Yes.
Um,
And
yeah.
he shoots the crystal shockwave thing at you, doesn't
Yes,
he?
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I liked it. It felt like a duel.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is kind of like the Artorias of this game, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, is probably the best way to describe it. He can summon up minions from the crystals around him.
That's right.
But if you're good at dodging him, you can force him to smash the crystals. So he actually kills his own minions, which I think is pretty
Oh,
cool.
that is
Um,
cool. How did you manage the minions? I think that's what I found most tricky in this.
um, from what I remember, so I did this area. Well, actually, I think I took some notes. Nothing too much about that. So I did this area first, so it was quite a difficult fight.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I almost like I like if a lot of minions spawned, I didn't really have the tools I needed to do a lot of crowd control because the boss, they can kind of teleport around. Like they can dash around, so it's really hard to hit them, especially when you're dealing with his charge attacks against you. Sometimes he'll kill them for you, which is good.
Yes. Yeah.
But like I basically had to, in the end, I kind of killed him before a lot of them spawned, and then it was okay. But in most cases, like like the shotgun is really effective against those guys. So if you have the shotgun, which you probably will if you go east northwest, then it's fine, right? Yeah. So I just had the normal pistol, which is they can dodge. They that's one thing I forgot to mention about them is that if you shoot them, they'll actually dodge to the side unless they are on their cooldown from having done a dash attack. So cool. That is a really cool thing about them, that they'll actually like teleport to the side, and the animation is super cool. So just shooting them with the pistol is not super effective, especially when you probably want to be using your ammo against the boss. So pretty tough fight if you do it first. But if you're doing it, if you do it last, he's kind of a joke. Like he's not a big deal. If you have the shotgun. Or actually, the sniper rifle is very effective against him. And we should mention that the shotgun is the weapon you get from the east, and the sniper rifle is the weapon you get from the north.
Yeah,
And then when you
became my go-to because I can't aim. The hardest thing in this fight definitely becomes the minion. And I think I found myself just dodging around a lot and just having to be really patient and waiting for them to kind of either accidentally die by one of his attacks, or just getting in a few cheap shots of my own.
Yeah, and I think one thing that helps with this guy is if you dodge towards him during his sword attacks, it kind of like you might get hit, but you could also get a really good opportunity to get in some damage. So there's like a risk reward thing there that I find generally being more aggressive and up in his face is it's a little bit more effective than trying to be at a distance, unless you have the sniper rifle, which is then you can just get away from him, and it's really good against him. Yeah. Okay, so that is the west area, and then that you beat those 3 areas, and it unlocks the south area, which is I should say one thing about the west area is there's a story to it. Which is that boss and the wolf guys you fight, like the samurai guys, those were like, I think, soldiers who were fighting against the giants. Like the big giants that were rampaging across the land. And like the crystals were used to stop the giants in like a last-ditch fight. And I think it corrupted the soldiers. So that like the boss is sort of like this kind of like crystal corrupted like Seath like guy that has kind of gone insane, but like maybe those guys weren't bad guys to start with. Maybe they were actually fighting against the giants. There's that one guy you meet in one of the optional side areas who sort of tells you the story about the war with the giants. So that I thought that was one of like the cooler story points in the game. Like it's like, oh cool, just all the crystals in that area I think were really neat. And like that one like hut you can find off on the side where it's like the guy inside has been turned to crystal. That was pretty cool too.
And you come across a bunch of crystal like warriors frozen in crystal.
Yes.
Sometimes you've got to destroy those crystals, effectively, wiping out that warrior's existence forever.
Well, actually what happens is if you kill the crystal reforms and the guy is still inside it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's like they've become a part of this like regenerating like nanomachine crystal thing that like it's like they can never get out because and
we forgot what I think are one of the most annoying enemies in the game, which are those crawling crystal guys.
The little ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, they can kind of hit you, like they can kind of come out of nowhere and attack you, but they die in one hit, so I mean,
The annoyance is if they get you, you turn to crystal, right?
right.
For
Yes.
another.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there
And
there
so if
there are those other enemies in the game, like the little like robots, the black robots with like four legs, that are
oh yeah,
similar to them. They drop down out of the ceiling to attack you, but they don't turn you to crystal, so they're a lot less annoying.
yep.
Yeah, and there are the big crystal dudes as well. The ones that shoot the crystal like explosion attack at you. Um, and that's just sort of like teaching you about the boss using that attack later on. They're not
Now,
that hard to kill if you use the pistol or if you use the shotgun or if you use the like charge up attack, like the charge up sword attack.
yep.
Yeah, all of those things are very effective against them.
Now remind me whether was the West also where they introduced turrets?
Turrets? No, those are also in the north. Yeah, they're also in the north area.
They're in the north.
But there are a
They are
lot of them
fun.
in the west area.
Right. I find them terribly annoying.
Um,
Just is there a way to shut down? Is there a way to shut them down when they're shooting at you?
Usually, yes, there's a switch you can press to turn them off.
Yeah,
But
I think I only sometimes found that switch.
the other thing that's super effective against them is the dash shield, like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it basically means like if you dash through their attack, then you're just going to soak the damage and it doesn't do anything to you. So that's really effective against those guys.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so yeah, the turrets are quite annoying, but there are ways to kind of get around them. Yeah, and just one thing about that charge up sword attack, man, that's so cool. I just oh, I use it all the time, not because it's the most effective attack, but just because it's like you feel like such a badass because when you kill guys with it, like their heads, like you chop their heads off and their heads go flying.
Mm.
There's like a special death animation for using that attack, and it's just so satisfying. And like, I think it, okay, um, anybody listening to this who loves Zelda, that's cool. But like, I think that the charge up sword attack in this game is so much better than the charge up sword attack in any of the Zelda games. It's like when I was a kid and I played Link to the Past. You know how you can like charge up the Master Sword and do your little like spin around attack.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I was always so frustrated with that attack. I was like, this is gonna be so cool that you charge up and do it. It's kind of like it doesn't have any range and like maybe just better off attacking them normally. But this thing has like big range and it kills like most enemies in one hit and their friggin' like heads go flying and you're just like, yeah. Like this feels like empowerment, like whereas the little like spin thing that Link does is a little bit less impressive.
Yeah, that's probably where they've said they were inspired by Link to the Past. Maybe that's another one of the connections there, but they've just decided to go to town on that move.
Yeah, I think
I don't
so.
think I don't think I used it at all this playthrough. I'm not an R. What is it? I'm not an R2 guy. I'm very much an R1 guy. I like the quick,
The quick
short,
attacks.
the quick attacks. That's it. That's me, and that's just my play style. So the other thing we should point out about the game is that you'll never, in one playthrough, you're very unlikely to be able to unlock all the upgrades.
Yeah, I think if you
So you
do like
do have to be
all of the
quite
side
selective.
areas, you could, but
Yeah,
if you're just doing like the sort of critical path, then
yeah,
like you're definitely not going to. So like multiple playthroughs will be rewarded in terms of upgrades for sure.
mm,
There's like
yeah.
more than you could possibly get on a critical path for playthrough. Um, so yeah, like there's many different play styles you can use, and pretty much all of them are effective, right? I never like I never like specced into something and been like, this is totally useless. I think some of the dash attacks in the game are a little bit like they're okay, but they use a little bit too much energy, so you kind of get screwed on being able to dash if you need to
Mm.
during a boss fight. But they're still definitely viable. It's like suboptimal, but still definitely a viable way to play. You're not going to be totally screwed. Um, so yeah, so I love the variety in builds, and I think that the variety in builds in this game works out really well, in part because this game isn't an RPG. Like,
Yeah.
there's no stats in the game, and aside from like HP, ammo, and like that's it. Um, and I guess your dash gauge, but like there's no like strength, health. It's not like Dark Souls where you have like 18 totally inscrutable stats, and the game isn't balanced at all around being able to use all of them effectively. So you kind of need to understand which ones are dump stats and which ones aren't dump stats. There's none of that kind of stuff in this game. This game is more like Bayonetta or one of those character action games where it's more focused on like how does this attack work in the game rather than like how can the player build out their character to maximize the strength of this attack.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It feels like the right level of complexity for
Yeah,
this game.
yeah, especially for a game of this length.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's like if it was a longer game, then maybe having more RPG mechanics would make sense, right?
I can't remember what are the upgrades in Shovel Knight. I'm trying to remember
Oh, in Shovel Knight, well,
because that feels comparable in that it's a game of kind of similar length. Um,
yeah, it's the upgrades in Shovel Knight are a little bit more involved in the sense that you get like multiple armors that are just like better armor, right?
right,
Or
right.
but there are like the different relics in the game that you can use, which are kind of like mm, I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of like a combination of Castlevania sub weapons and Mega Man boss powers, right? Like,
Right.
or
And
like
I'm
slash
just
like the
remembering
rush
now.
thing that Mega Man uses, like the sort of utility items you can get in Mega Man.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just remembering now that you can totally like it is a bit more RPG in Shovel Knight in that you can totally grind for
Yeah,
um
money.
for coins and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas it's really important in Hyperlight Drifter you can't grind. It's
Yeah, I
just
mean it's the way you get resources in this game is by exploring, not by grinding, and
yeah,
that is
exactly.
a very very good thing. As much as I love Shovel Knight, I mean Shovel Knight is fantastic,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah.
especially the Plague Knight campaign, that is masterclass stuff. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So okay, so let's go on to the final south area then. So the south area is basically a large factory that is under this desert. Um, so what did you think of this area? Yeah.
Yeah, the South area is very interesting in that unlike the other areas, it actually has mini bosses.
Yes, it's a great way to change up the progression in this game. Is they added, I think there's like four mini bosses instead of one big boss.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, that was a really interesting surprise because you think that maybe you've reached the end, and you certainly haven't.
Yeah, and it's like it's so great because it's not a boss rush. It's not like Dr.
Yeah,
Wily's castle, like where you have to go like, oh, boss, boss, boss. It's nothing like that. It's just like, oh, you go to this sub dungeon and then there's a mini boss, and you go to this sub dungeon, there's another mini boss. So I guess there's probably some iterations of Dr. Wily's castle that are like that, but I'm thinking more like Mega Man 2, Dr. Wily's castle.
mm,
Um,
mm.
yeah, so it's I think all of the sub bosses or the mini bosses in this area are pretty good. Um, um, but what did you think of like the actual like levels in between them?
You'll have to jog my memory as to what they were like. Actually, I'm trying to remember.
So there are sort of like these like cavernous factory areas under the desert, and
Oh, yeah.
they're like
This,
sort of like a lot of like narrow platforms, a lot of turrets, a lot of like cyborg enemies that attack you. Like
yes,
those
and
big robots that shoot three shots and you have like a laser sword to attack you with. Um,
yeah, and the occasional large dinosaur pop out as well.
Yeah, like
That's
that
right.
sort of like
Uh,
biomechanical horror thing that like jumps up and attacks you. Yeah,
it's kind of a combination of a lot of well because there's a lot of platforming you kind of have to do as well. There's a lot of kind of
yeah,
jumping from side to side and managing waves of enemies, but in this instance, you've got to manage them across different platforms as well.
yeah.
That stuff's really cool. I love all the robot enemies actually. I really here's where I kind of learned how to do the deflection with my sword.
Oh yeah,
And
no,
you've got
totally. Like this is the area for that, where it's like
yeah,
you have like a number of gaps between you and the enemies with the rifles,
yeah.
um, and you just bat those projectiles back at them, and it feels so good. Especially when there's like multiple projectiles coming at you, and you just like hit all of them out of the air, and it like goes back and hits all of the enemies.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's great.
yeah, it's great. And then there are the rocket launcher like orc guys,
Yeah.
which we've seen in other areas. Like they show up in the east area, I think, on some of the arena parts. Their rockets are like seeking, so they can kind of come around and hit you if you're dodging, and they do a lot of damage. Um, but the really
But
cool
they're
thing,
also they're also really easy to avoid as well, which is great. Again, it's
uh,
just so well.
yeah, it's like you can't avoid them by just moving out of the way, but
No.
if you put an obstacle between you and them, then they'll just crash into the obstacle. And
Yeah.
something even cooler than that is you can slice them out of the air with your sword. And like they like hang in the air like sliced in half for a moment and then they explode. And it's just
That's
like
cool.
that's so satisfying. Like you feel like you're like Cashern or something from some anime. It's
Yeah.
really sweet. And yeah, the big thing with those guys is you just be really aggro, get up in their face, and they'll be screwed because they have a really slow firing rate. They have quite a bit of life. I think they have like 4 life, but you can still take them down with, especially with the plasma pistol. If you just hit them once and then shoot them with the plasma pistol, they die.
Totally. And the actual design of this level's really cool. It's very mechanical. There's stuff going on, but you'll also come upon these. They're like giant hearts in tubes and stuff.
Yes, there are the
It's
the pieces of the giants that you find throughout the rest
yeah.
of the world that are like were assembled here. And this is actually the factory where the orc guys that you see in the rest of the game were created. You
Right.
see assembly lines where they were being constructed, and it sort of seems to indicate that like they were taking people and turning them into orcs, like they're kind of like Uruk Hai or something from Lord of the Rings. So you know, it's this kind of like biomechanical H.R. Giger kind of scenario happening in this factory, and you know, it's basically establishing the stakes for the final battle of the boss. Like, if you
Yep.
do not destroy this boss, then this is what's going to happen to everybody in this area. Um,
Mm.
so I mean, yeah, that's all really cool. I love all the assembly lines and yeah, just being able to see like how all of the different enemies you're fighting have been constructed.
Yep.
That's always really cool. I
And
like
this
it.
this level, I think, more than these dungeons, rather, more than others in the game, allow a bit of breathing space. Like they let you have these really intense fights, but
Yes.
then you will walk for a while and just kind of take in the construction and the robots and the conveyor belts, and you're like, oh shit, what is this? And
Yeah.
you're really tense because you're waiting for something to come out at you, but it doesn't. You're just taking a nice long walk. It's really great.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see why this was or that was the area they based the demo for the game on. Um,
Mm.
yeah, because it really does sort of like capture something really cool. So yeah, so I should mention that before you enter the actual area proper, you see the other drifter, and he dies
Yes.
of his
Yes.
sickness. Tells you his story, which I'm not 100% sure on this. Like, I mean, there are like lengthy plot explanations out on the internet you can check out, but I haven't really got into those. And I should mention that the way that you can find out about the plot in detail is you find these tablets that you can unlock with keys that you can find throughout the game, which are like super hidden, and they have some writing on them, which isn't written in this like weird sort of alien script. And some people have managed to like transliterate that stuff into English. I mean, I think it's written in English, but it's just the characters are the alphabet is replaced with a different alphabet, and it tells the story about what happens in the game. So, you know, if you want to find out the plot in detail, either look online or you know go figure it out for yourself. There's another sort of like speech bubble thing that comes up when you find the other drifter and he dies, and it seems like what happened is for whatever reason his wife died, or maybe his kid died, probably his wife, and then he went off on a journey to try to destroy um, this monstrosity that's been hunting you, that's sort of at the center of all this difficulty, and probably to find a cure. He's probably sort of like summoned into it by the Anubis character, like you were, but just failed in his mission. And you can take his armor or his cloak and you can equip it in his house if you want to get the little bonus that you get for using it. But yeah, there's not really too much to him. He's just sort of like this hero who came before you, and now you have to take up the mantle and finish the job. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and the enemies or the people that were in this area before like it all went to shit are like the lizard people. You can kind of find them in the bottom of the main desert area. They're hiding out in this ruin, and it's really cool when you go into their house and like one of them will talk to you, but all the other ones just like skitter away and hide in corners and stuff. I love that animation.
Yeah, totally, really cool. And the other thing about having the other drifter stretch goals of the Kickstarter was actually co-op. And
yes, have you tried that?
No, I actually couldn't. I couldn't see it in the menu. I might have missed it. Have you tried it?
I haven't, because I was gonna try it, but the person I had over the other day wasn't really into action games, so I ended up playing Portal 2 instead.
Yep.
That co-op instead. But yeah, like on the PC version, you just press start to go to like the options sort of menu, and there's like a co-op thing you can turn on and off, and then you just press I think it's like A or X on the second controller, and like it's like there is it's not the other drifter, the one that is like a character in the story. It's like a shadow of the main drifter, your character, that gets formed, and they basically they basically have the same attacks that your normal character has, but they also have like a thing they can do, if you like hold down, I think it's maybe you hold down the dash button or something, they will teleport back to the main character. So you know, it's pretty standard like co-op thing where if one of you gets stuck, then you can teleport back to the like main person. So yeah, I haven't had a chance to actually like play through the game in co-op, but I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's cool.
I mean, probably really easy in the sense that it's kind of like sunbroing it up, but you know, that's fun too.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, it'd be. Imagine how quickly you could smash through the game with a friend.
Oh yeah,
it's just like you could do one afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame there's no online co-op, because we could have done like a run through, and I'm sure we could have speed run it pretty fast. Anyway, so yeah, so that's sort of like the peripheral stuff for this area. What did you think of the cyborg guys that use the triple shot and the laser sword against you? How did you deal with them?
Yeah, so they're really fun. I mean, they're difficult, but again, they're the guys who inspired me to keep some distance and deflect those projectiles.
Right. So that's how you dealt with them.
Don't get too close to them. Basically, was my rule, because they're pretty deadly up close.
They're
so if I could get them,
yeah,
Yeah,
like
go on.
that's a reasonable strategy. I think it's an effective strategy, but if you use the charge up sword attack against them, you can kill them in one hit.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and it's not really advisable because their melee attack is really strong. But I
Yeah.
tend to do it anyway just because it's cool. I like it might get me killed, but I'll do it anyway just because it's like, oh yeah, like bam, and then just like smash apart this cyborg. Um,
No, I
it,
was at the stage. I was at the stage of the game where I was playing pretty cautious. I was holding on to those health up, the health items
yeah,
closely. I was not taking any risks, and I'm really glad I did that because you hit mini bosses, and
yeah,
those
yeah, yeah,
guys never
yeah,
take
yeah,
away your health.
yeah,
So
and
yeah, I think
um, I
definitely one of the most high risk areas of the game, but
yeah,
really fun, really good, really well designed.
it's like the last like proper area of the game, right? So
Mm.
the actual enemy encounters you have are quite difficult, and yeah, and then I guess you're on team slash Elon instead of team smash Elon, so it's a reasonable reasonable way to take them down. Um,
That's right.
yeah, so okay, so let's talk about the mini bosses. There's the one mini boss who is like the fake energy core. Um,
Mm.
like you remember, like you go down into that room and then like you oh dear, it says encoding overloaded. Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no, VLC, what are you doing?
What does
Uh,
that mean?
it says turning down video settings or using a faster encoding preset. Oh well. At least we'll have the audio if this all goes wrong.
You'll be
So,
able to layer them, right?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I've got the audio
yeah.
backing up here.
You've got the audio, so yeah, it's all good. So yeah, so anyway, there's that enemy that you kind of like come down into that room and there's like one of those energy cores like you grab a hold of it and pull it out and then it makes that sound that's like super rewarding that
Oh, that's right.
that like wow 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 sound. There's like the hissing as the steam comes out and stuff.
Yeah,
But then like this time you like pull it out and it's like wow wow wow, like it's like this weird distorted version of it.
yeah,
And like the actual top of it isn't flashing like a normal one is, even though you can hear one in the distance. It's like you can
yeah,
hear the sound for one of the energy cores, but it's actually in a different spot and it's tricking you. And if you look
yeah,
closely, you can see that like it's not flashing in the normal way, and then it makes that weird noise. And it's like, actually, I'm a monster. It's a mimic, right? It's a mimic. It's
yeah.
totally a mimic.
It's a great moment because you've been looking for finding those things in the game. They're how you progress.
Yeah,
And then just so late in the game they do that. And you've still got to probably find a few more after that. And I was nervous before I pulled any more of those out of the ground.
yeah. Yeah, it's so good. I mean, it's like mimics are always good, but yeah, that's
And
um,
it's not they didn't get cheap with it. It only happens the once,
the
but
one
like it's
time.
still
Yeah,
so great. Yeah.
yeah. So this guy, he is like a bullet hell boss. He shoots out those little probes, and then they just like spray bullets all over the map. Uh,
Mm.
so how did you end up dealing with this guy?
I think I just got aggressive with this guy.
Yeah, that's
I
the way
think it
to do
was
it. That's the way to do it.
just
Is
get right up into him. Yeah.
if you destroy his probes, then he's kind of helpless. Like he has a dash attack, but it's not that good.
Yeah.
Um, so like again, Team Smash Elon, just charge up that charge attack, and you can take out all of his probes in one hit. And then he's just sort of standing there like and then you just kill him. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's good. It's fun. Um, okay, so yeah, there's that guy. He is toast. Then there is the guy that is like a flying boss above like a bunch of platforms that start disappearing, and he has like those plasma balls that float around him.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Um, So the first time I fought him, I didn't understand that you could actually bat those plasma balls back at him
Mm,
if you have the proper upgrade.
yeah.
But I still managed to kill him pretty fast as long as I was aggressive and just like spammed plasma pistols at him.
Yeah, like I found in general the mini bosses were not as hard as the main bosses, I guess. Like
Yeah,
you could they were there, they were unexpected difficulty spikes, but they weren't super hard. This guy was fun, and the only problem with that is I didn't fight them enough times to kind of remember them too well. Like
right.
um,
Yeah, they
I
do kind
remember.
of flow together in a way. Um,
Yeah, I remember this guy because yeah, I really liked the way that he made the floor disappear. I think that was a really cool little mechanic.
yeah,
But that's the only thing I really remember from that fight. I can't remember how I beat him. I just didn't die.
yeah, totally. And then the next boss is the Scythe boss. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so he does like a charge attack and he like spins his scythe and throws it at you. He's kind of like Spectre Knight in Shovel Knight.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, as long as you learn his patterns and dodge his scythe effectively, he's pretty easy. Um,
Yeah, totally. And I think at this point I had fully upgraded my health slots.
right.
So even though I was probably taking lots of damage from facing these guys for the first time, I had enough kind of health slots that I could just keep recharging.
Yeah,
Um,
I didn't bother investing fully in health. I think I had four instead of five this time, but
yep.
it was kind of like I'm not really using these that much anyway, so I just took one of them because it was like, why not? But yeah, I was like, I'd rather get more attacks just because they're
Yeah.
fun. But I
Unfortunately,
totally did the same thing the first and second time I played through the game. I was
yeah.
like, I just give me that health right away. More health,
Yeah,
more
unfortunately,
grenades.
yeah, it became my tactic. So, like, basically, I would just get hit by a scythe and then go and heal and come back. And I didn't dodge effectively that spinning scythe attack of his very well. Because it's pretty good. It gets you really well.
Yeah, it does. If you don't like have if you don't have the pattern memorized yet, it can get
Yeah,
you pretty good. And yeah, you just need to learn the pattern, and then you can just dodge in at exactly the right moment and slam him, and he goes
yeah.
down no problem. Um, then the last boss is the archer. So what did you think
Mm.
about that?
Yeah, trying to remember the archer. So he's got a few cool moves. Like he shoots. Obviously, he can arrow shoot you directly. So he shoots these
Yes,
arrows straight at you.
like rapid
Um,
fire.
Yes, yeah, he's got like a triple shot one. He's got one where he shoots it into the air
Yes.
and like mines come down or something.
Yeah, that's right. He shoots
Or
up into the air, and there's mines that appear around him, and then if you walk over them, they blow up. Um, so yeah, I mean, he is. I had a little bit of trouble with him. He's kind of tough
mm,
because he shoots so many arrows that you can
yeah,
actually just run like you can just run down your dash gauge so that you can't dash anymore, and then you can get
yeah,
hit by him. So again, the answer is to be a little bit aggressive, but you can't be too aggressive because he does do a ton of damage if he gets you. So, like, you can,
mm,
to some extent, you can bat his arrows back at him, um, and you can get around him, but I found, like, really the most effective way to fight him was just to, like, wait for him to do the shoot up into the air thing, and then just slam him
yeah,
as hard as I could.
yeah. That's a good tactic. I'm not sure if this was working, but I suspect I actually got him to bash himself into his own mines as well. Kind
Yeah,
of
maybe
lured
you
him.
can do that. I wasn't too sure about
Yeah.
that, whether it's possible or not, but
Mm.
it
I
might
think
be.
yeah, I think I was kind of effectively kind of dashing and pretty sure he got hit by his own mine, which is great.
Right.
Oh, that's right. No, you set them off. You can hit them and set them off as well,
Oh,
from memory.
okay. Interesting. I didn't know that. I thought it was just like proximity thing. Um,
Oh, yeah, yeah. So proximity does set them off, but like if you're moving quite quickly, they'll go off and they'll hit him.
right. Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
Cool. I've never used that tactic against him, so that could be fun to try out.
Mm.
Um, all right. Yeah, so then you get into the big end area of that whole part where it's like there's the in the distant like there's the beating heart that you find, and then in the distance there's like that like Titan giant thing that's like in a death pose, like off in the like way out in some giant cavern you're in, and it's like super panoramic, and um, that was one of the scenes from the demo where I was just like, whoa, this is so cool. The archer guy was not in the demo. There was no boss in the demo, but you just kind of went straight from one of the areas to that scene of the giant in the distance. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so then we go down to the final area. Basically, you clear out all of the crystals around the central area, and then the central area opens up, and much like many games, but of course, maybe the obvious reference is Demon Souls. There's an aperture in the middle of the area that will take you to the boss, right? So it's very
Mm.
similar to the Nexus in Demon Souls, where if you go down below the Nexus to fight the what is it, the Great Old One or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
Um,
I think the boss name is a spoiler, so we'll leave it.
yeah. Okay. Anyway. Um, yeah. Right. Right. Of course. So yeah, so this area, like the walk up to the boss here, I think it's like, oh, it's so cool. Just like you're going
Yeah.
down this like elevator, and like there's like kind of a city sort of thing in the background, and it's like this
Mm.
crazy like cyberpunk kind of city background. Yeah. And like really,
It's really cool. It's really cool, and there aren't any enemies on the way. You're just kind of walking. You're walking through, and and the music's going. I don't know. It's a great moment.
yeah, and it I think one thing about that area that is really cool is they do such an effective job of making pink seem ominous.
Mm,
It's
yeah,
like
good point.
like it's not usually a color you associate with like dread and horror,
But that's
but
the same pink that's been throughout the game, right? Like, so there's
yes,
these
that's
kind
right.
of pink pipes have been running all over the different areas and dungeons, and there's these explosive pink tanks and stuff in the game. So it's
Yeah,
kind of assumed that this is some sort of really significant power source or something.
exactly.
Yeah,
Like in the rest of the game, it shows up and it's like, oh yeah, like it's part of the environment, or except for when the boss shows up and like taunts you, kind of, right? Like you get this
that's
premonition
right.
of him killing you. Um, then it's like black and pink, but it's predominantly black. It's just that when you see that sort of cityscape in the background, that's it's all pink and black and all these cool
Mm,
colors, and it's just it's really sort of ominous, and the music is really good in terms of the sort of like drone like um, sound that it uses. And then you have like you walk down past that part where there's like the four statues of like the different races that constructed this place, like the people that were killed by all the different enemies that you've been fighting.
mm,
And I love those statues. They look so cool. Just like they're holding like those giant like sort of like goblets that have like the
yeah.
pink stuff pouring out of it. Um,
Mm.
yeah,
Very, very cool.
yeah, it's kind of reminiscent of like the design of like the dwarven city in The Hobbit. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, which is, I mean, it's not a good movie, but that part was kind of cool.
yeah, totally. No, totally.
Yeah. All right, and then yeah, and then as you're coming down, like the boss is actually like sort of like flickering in and out of existence, like around you, right? Like he sort of
Yeah.
appears for a second in one place and then disappears and appears somewhere else.
And
Um,
I don't really get what the relationship has been with Drifter and the boss, because that boss keeps turning up in your visions, and the boss is there at the beginning, and it's like there's
yeah,
some sort of connection there, and I've never been entirely sure what that connection is, but the two are linked somehow.
Yeah, so well, let's take a look here. The sort of the TLDR it gives on the story is that the Drifter is a member of an artificial species whose origin began long ago. So maybe they're connected to this monstrosity.
Yeah, right.
So you're a drifter by occupation. Other drifters are not necessarily the same race. You travel the world in search of new and interesting tech from long forgotten civilizations of olden times. You're a nomad and a loner. The crystal or immortal cell you have to destroy is essentially a malevolent entity called Judgment that has access to and has stolen the power of a godlike entity. Its creation caused the Armageddon that has left the world in a post apocalyptic state. The godlike entity is Anubis, the jackal with a halo. He wants you to kill Judgment so it can't resurrect the Titans, destroy the world, and steal his power. You're sick because you've been infected by the evil entity using the god's power. Your only hope is to reach Judgment and hope for a cure. So basically, I guess it's like
Right.
maybe it's some kind of like cyber virus that has infected your mind, and it's also
Yeah.
the thing that's killing you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's implied there that judgment is responsible for your illness. Um,
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
So that's probably
So
why it's in
yes,
your head. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah. So again, if you want to, find out more about this stuff for people who are listening, just go check online. There's all the plot descriptions are out there.
If you're
Uh,
still listening all these hours in,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we've got
Might
we've
get one or
gone.
two people to listen to the whole thing. We've given this the full treatment.
Yeah, we've gone for about half the length of the game.
Yeah, we have actually. It's pretty funny. So yeah, so you get to the final boss, and it's Judgment. It's this thing you've been seeing throughout the whole game, and it actually like previews the attacks it's going to use against you for the most part. Like when those different
Mm.
parts where you see your death, um, and uh, and so it. What did you think of the final boss?
I really liked this boss. Like I said earlier, it was when I faced him yesterday. I was destroyed the first few times. And I couldn't believe that I had ever beaten him. And I was going to be like, you know what, fuck this. I've played enough of the game, enough to talk to Kyle tomorrow night. I won't worry about beating him. But
Yeah,
of course, you keep going and you gradually learn each move. And I think it took me probably about 10 times. Um, you lose count because you can die so quickly.
yes,
But once you've got it mapped, it's one of the most fun boss fights. To the point where when I beat him, I just wanted to do it again. Like it's such a
yeah,
good feeling.
totally. So like yeah, so when you first get into the boss room, and there's like that the sort of diamond shape that you've come to associate with the boss and with Anubis,
Yeah,
um, like, and then you like open it up and then like that aperture opens and there's like this crystal in the middle. It's like sort of like oozing pink stuff, and
yeah,
it makes that horrible like blah sound. Like you're like, oh shit, it's on now. And then he like shows up and yeah, so his attacks, he has like a dash attack that he does, which if you don't dodge it, it'll kill you like in like two hits, I think.
yeah,
Um, and he also has like a giant laser beam attack that he can do, like just sort of like belches this like pink fire at you. And
mm,
you have to bait that, so like
yeah,
you have to like stand like one direction, and then what he's going to do is his charge up to attack you. You have to get into the like to his side so you can hit him, and he doesn't hit
yeah.
you
That,
because
that's
it's like instant
that's one of the
death if you
hardest
get hit
ones.
with it, right?
That's it. Yeah, that's definitely one of the hardest parts. But once you work out how to bait it, it also becomes one of the easiest ways to get hits on him.
Yes,
Because once he starts blowing it, once he starts blowing that fire, he has to keep going, and then that gives you a chance to sneak in and get a few hits.
totally. Yeah, and then he also has the attack where he disappears and everything goes dark, and there's like those little like ball things that show up, and then those turn into like area denial, like massive explosions on the floor.
Hmm.
So how did you end up dealing with those?
Yeah, those I actually remembered from the first play. So when they happened yesterday, um, I wasn't as surprised. I remember that they kind of follow you around, so you can kind of trick them into heading towards one corner,
Yeah.
and then dash to the rest to the other corner, and they'll kind of explode, and you've got enough space.
Yeah.
It's not always 100% reliable, but it's a good way to avoid them.
Yeah, like I figured out the same trick basically. He's like you go to one corner of the room, wait a while for them all to sort of like, get concentrated at that end and then dash over to the other side.
Yeah, yeah,
And like it leaves the boss like totally exposed when he does that, and you can just
that's
hammer
right.
him. But you do have to
Yeah,
be careful because, like every time you sort of like whittle his life down, he gets an extra dash. So
yeah,
if
yeah.
you're if like once he gets to three dash attacks, if you like have not enough charge on your dash bar, then you're just gonna get wrecked. So you do have to be a little bit careful about that. And yeah, I think that's all of his different attacks, right?
No, he's got that cool. He's got the move where he goes in the middle and spits out his arms, like spits out
Oh
long
yeah,
tentacles.
yeah, right, right. He shoots like
And
those black arms all over the room, and you kind of have to get in between them. Um,
yeah, but they've got a bit of a tell, so you can always tell where they're about to get shot out.
yeah,
Which I found, I'm sure the first time I played it, that was horrible. But once you get the move, this is yet again another time that you can just kind of just get out of the way of the tentacles and hit him while he's connected to the walls of the room.
yes. And then the last attack he has that I forgot to mention is that he shoots out that sort of like bullet hell like wave around him.
Yes, which
Uh,
you can repel.
you can repel it with your sword and then just like dash right through that and go and hit him,
Yeah,
and that's like
yeah.
so satisfying to do.
And
Um,
I'm pretty sure it causes damage to him if you knock them back.
yes, that's right.
Yeah,
So yeah, like you can kind of use the full range of your abilities against him, and it's pretty satisfying. And so when you kill him, you do like this sweet death or like kill animation, like you like what is it like you like teleport above him and then like stab your sword down into the body or something like that, and then like you like
yeah,
break apart the crystal, and I don't know, it's like it's just an awesome kill scene that you have. It's like one of those things that they would add in like Dragon Age Inquisition, except then you watch it like 600 times and it's not cool anymore. But in this
yeah,
case,
yeah,
it's just the one time, so it's like really awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so right. So then, pretty much like he is a load supporting boss. The facility starts to fall apart as soon as he dies, and then you go ahead and you start to leave the area. You can't dash anymore, and you're sort of coughing like crazy. And you get to a certain point, and then Anubis starts leading you out of the building. And then you kind of like get transported into like Anubis's realm or something like that, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah, it's
and-
kind of confusing here, but it's really beautiful though.
yeah, it's like another one of those animated sequences that comes up, and pretty much what ends up happening is that uh, you destroy the threat of judgment, but like it's kind of like Anubis has sort of tricked you into doing what he wanted. Like it's like it's like you're the hero, you save the city, but at the same time you don't get a cure. You end up dying.
Yeah,
Um and it's sort of symbolized by like the sort of sickly pink water turning to blue water and the skies turning blue, and like those sort of like glowing yellow things you see in the sky everywhere throughout the game, they start to disappear because I guess those were part of like the like nano machines or something that the factory that Judgment was controlling was producing. So like it's like the skies sort of clear up, and you kind of like I guess it's sort of assumed that it's like Anubis is like, well, you did your job that you were supposed to do for me, and now you can come join me in death or something like that.
yeah, because Anubis I kind of saw it as a bit of an illusion because the Drifter kind of sits beside this rock statue that that dwarven statue and kind of dies.
Right at the
But then
campfire
has a
from the
vision.
it's from the start of the game, right? It's the
That's
same
right. There's a
campfire.
vision from the start of the game. Yeah, so it's kind of I don't know. It looks like an illusion. or something. Yeah, Anubis kind of giving him a glimpse of a possible future, or
Right.
a future without ruin.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting interpretation too. That like maybe this was sort of happening in his head or
Mm.
something like that. So yeah, it's left open to interpretation to some extent. The ending. I think that I guess in the context of the sort of motivation behind this game's creation, it's sort of like saying that it's that idea that like even if you die, like community lives on kind of thing, right? Like the human race
Yeah,
continues, or like the animal kind race continues, or whatever you want to call it. Like you can contribute something to society even if you are consigned to death. Um,
that's right.
yeah,
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 yeah, absolutely. I think you've nailed it there. I mean, I can't imagine this guy's the creator's life. I mean, he's described that he could die at any day in his head.
yeah,
So you could definitely draw a parallel between, his desire to do meaningful things in his lifetime,
yeah.
with the drifter's journey in this game.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not really like a standard hero's journey story, um,
Mm,
but I think it is definitely like a heroic story. It's kind of like the hero's motivation and going through with the final battle and the consequences of it. It's not really clear whether like the drifter knew what he was getting into before the battle.
yeah,
But like
yeah.
it's kind of like he accepts what happens after the fact. It's like okay, like this is all right, even if it's not what I wanted. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So
And
so yeah,
it's just so interesting that it's almost like there's almost a bit of a cycle happening there as well. With I mean, I wonder how many drifters came before.
yeah. I mean
We've
that's
seen.
that's really interesting. Is it like is this a cycle or is this just like you were the successful drifter and everybody else failed? Right.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
think both interpretations are open. Right.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, totally. Well, I mean, there's also it seems to imply that Anubis is gone as well. There's
yeah. It's
the
like oh, like I'm no longer like stuck here, like I'm no longer tied to this technology, so I can
uh,
go back to my realm. Um,
I don't know. It's one of those games where when I try to think about the story too much, I don't get a lot out of it. Like I
mhm.
can appreciate what it is, but it's actually not what I love about the game.
Yeah,
What I love about it is just how evocative it is. To use, a wanky term. But it's super evocative. Like it's hard to describe this game as anything else.
yeah,
It's hugely emotionally affecting, as well as just being super, super fun to play.
yeah,
So I really don't mind that I'm not getting a lot of narrative closure from it, because it's really ticking a lot of other boxes for me.
yeah. I agree. I think it's like it's it's not a bad story, and it's not like a like plot spaghetti nightmare like Dark Souls 3.
That's
Uh,
right.
but it's a very simple story, right? Like once
Yeah.
you get past the obfuscation, it's just like okay, yeah, like all right. Like I mean, the ending is a little bit ambiguous in terms of what happened, but one way or the other, it's sort of like it's about acceptance and like accepting death,
Mm.
right? And like
Yeah.
what you do with your time in this world. But I agree that it didn't feel it like I didn't really have like a moment where I was like, oh, this story was so great. It's like I could sort of intellectually appreciate it and appreciate the scenes from the story, but like as a whole, it didn't really come together into something that felt really super memorable. Um,
Mm.
so I guess because the characters are so like flat and they don't have dialogue or anything like that, right? It's a little bit hard to
Yeah.
get attached to them. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think it has a certain like mythic quality, and that it's like this could be any sort of hero in this kind of situation, but it isn't like very personal story or anything like that. Even though it's personal for the creator and sort of working through the issues he wanted to bring up, the characters don't feel like ones that you relate to very personally. Um,
Yeah, and I'm like huge props to the creator. Like he did set out to tell a very but at the same time, he hasn't done it in a very generic way at all. Like you
yeah,
could completely miss it. The first time I played it, I had no idea about that context, and I did not draw any of those interpretations from it whatsoever. To me, it was
yeah,
just a really, really well created 2D action game, and that's at the heart of it. That's what he's created, and that's such a cool achievement. It's not hitting anyone over the head with kind of his narrative, personal story intention.
yeah. I really like how the Drifter is kind of a self-insert character, but he never feels like a sort of Mary Sue or anything like
Yeah,
that, right? Like it's,
yeah.
um, I think that's kind of like the positive side of your relationship with the Drifter being so impersonal and him being so abstract.
Mm.
That like you never get into that sort of like this is you know the character like it's not, it never feels like a like wish fulfillment fantasy for the creator.
Yeah.
It feels legitimate, even if it is a somewhat simple story. So yeah, like wasn't massively dissatisfied with the story. I never felt that motivated to like get into the lore or go like look up like how to translate those things. Um,
Yep.
so in that way, I think like if you want to compare it to like Dark Souls, I feel like it isn't as engrossing though. Like the lore isn't as engrossing as one of those games,
Hmm.
but it's also coherent and it makes sense and it's not hitting you over the head with anything and it tells a story. So, considering how good the rest of the game is, except for like maybe some of the exploration stuff, I'm willing to forgive that the story is a little bit flat. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
totally.
so like that's why I was like, well, like there are parts of this game like no matter how many times I play it, I'll never really feel that interested in, but it never really felt like it took away from my experience. And so that's why I was like, yeah, this game like it has its issues, but it still feels like it is like the game of the year for me. That's just my personal opinion, but that's where I see it for 2016.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is Hyperlight Drifter. Hopefully,
You,
somebody
you, you
got
don't
all the
even
way
need
to
to
the end
play
of
it.
this discussion.
If you're here,
Yeah.
you don't even need to play it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Except,
if you're
actually,
here and
you
you
should
haven't
play
played it,
it.
that's actually probably a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, because the actual playing of the game is just as good, if not better, than discussing what's in it.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah,
and it's been really a really fun game to discuss, actually.
yeah. I don't do these sorts of things very often, but like this is a game where I wanted to sort of dig into it because I did a short video about the game before, but I
Yep.
felt like I wasn't really satisfied with it. So this is kind of like giving a definitive statement on it.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So I guess I'm gonna stop the recording here, and
Awesome.
thanks for participating. And
Cheers.
is there any
Thanks for having me
channels
as
or
well.
anything that you would like people to check you out on?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow which is at Elias Nohra, ELIASNOHRA. I probably have a video game of my own coming out early next year,
All
so
right.
keep your eyes open for that.
All right. So that's on Twitter, right?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. And well, you can always find me here on this YouTube channel. And yeah, just keep watching for more Front Mission Let's Plays. All right. And I think that's it for us.